Hi guys, my name is Maria. I'm an illustrator and character designer from Turin, Italy. I am so thankful to 21 Draw and excited to be teaching this course, especially knowing how many of you backed it on Kickstarter. I am a firm supporter of online courses and improving your skills and artistic knowledge any way you can. I think nowadays you don't really need to go to art school to become a good artist, and whether you are a beginner just entering the world of drawing and illustration, or you are someone who has been drawing for a while and wants to brush up on the basics, this course is a good fit for you. I am going to be touching upon basic concepts of drawing like anatomy, perspective, figure drawing, and I'm going to be doing it in the next 3 hours by using a series of theory videos, which I promise I'll try to keep to a minimum, and then followed by practice videos where I will show you how to apply these methods and concepts into real-life drawing. I have been working as a professional illustrator for books and school books for the past 3 years now, with publishing clients like Oxford University Press, Cengage, and imprints of Hachette and Disney. However, I didn't have what you'd call a classical artistic education. In high school, I went to what in Italy is known as a Liceo Classico, which means there is a grammar school with a focus on humanities and ancient languages like Greek and Latin. Then I went on to go to London College of Communication in London, which is part of the University of the Arts. But again, I didn't do an art, like fine art degree. I did magazine publishing degree with a focus on graphic design, and it didn't involve that much artistic skill, as you call it. I then worked in several marketing jobs and non-creative jobs like being an English teacher, and I realized at some point that didn't sort of reflect what I wanted to do as a kid. So I went back to school, back to Italy, and I attended 2 years at the International School of Comics, where I studied traditional animation, which provided me with a basic knowledge of anatomy and composition and layout design. I decided to quit my job and start practicing more, and I took the chance by joining the Mermaid Challenge on Instagram in May 2017, which may seem like a silly thing to do, but actually turned to be a turning point in my creative career, mostly because I started drawing every day. I really committed to it, and I saw an incredible progress from day 1 to day 31. And of course, if you look back at it, it's still pretty rough in comparison to how I draw now. But for me, it was all the encouragement I needed, really, because it gave me the confidence to see that if I put the time in, I would see results. I'm telling you my personal artistic journey because I want to convey the fact that you don't need to be doing a specific educational path to get where you want. It takes a bit of luck, but you can get where you want if you put the practice in, and there's no substitute for that. It doesn't matter what fancy school you go to. If you don't take the time to hone your craft, you'll never really see any progress. As I was mentioning, in the next 3 hours, we are going to touch upon several basic concepts of drawing, and each one of these concepts, like perspective or anatomy, could have a whole course on them. So I'm going to try and provide you with an overview that can help you practically when you set out as a beginner. In these videos, you're going to see screencasts recorded on an iMac paired with a Cintiq, Wacom Cintiq 22 HD from 2015, I think. And you can use a different software. I'm going to be using Photoshop CC 2020, but you can use a different drawing software or a drawing tablet or just pencil and paper, because these are all basic concepts, as I was saying, so they can be applied to traditional art or digital art, and it's exactly the same. So don't worry about the tools that you have. I guess that's all, and my thanks go to 21 Draw for organizing this amazing compendium of artists doing courses, and to you guys for backing the project on Kickstarter. I guess I'll see you in the next video. Hi guys, and welcome to the first video in this series, Basic Anatomy. In this section, I'm going to approach how to draw the human body in a way that is anatomically correct. Of course, anatomy is such a broad subject that entire courses are taught just on that. So in this video, I'm not going to be able to be extensive. However, it can be a good starting point. So where to start approaching such a vast subject? Well, like in most things, I think that starting from the beginning is usually a good method. In ancient Greece, artists and sculptors were fascinated by the idea of finding the most beautiful proportions for the human body, to the point that they developed a canon, that is, a set of proportions they considered the most harmonious, and applied it to the most famous statues of the classical era. Please note, canons of beauty are very subjective to each culture and time period. They are constantly evolving, just like artistic taste. So there's no one canon that is inherently right or better than the others. This is something I struggle with as a budding artist, and perhaps something that bothers you too. As a beginner, I wanted to be taught the correct way to depict people in a realistic way. But the truth is that even when you're tracing over a picture of a human body from an anatomy book, you are still applying your own vision and your own perspective. Every depiction of a human being, and indeed any landscape, is a way we express ourselves and the way that we see the world. There wouldn't be much point to art if we didn't try to say something with it, right? So this said, a canon is usually based on proportions, as I was mentioning before. Proportions are the relationship or ratios between height, width, and depth of an object or a person. Proportions are recurring mathematical patterns both in nature and in human-made artifacts, like the golden ratio, for example, which was also very dear to the ancient Greeks. If you've never heard of it, the golden ratio is a mathematical relationship that occurs if the ratio of the sum of the numbers a and b divided by the larger number, a, is equal to the ratio of the larger number divided by the smaller number, a divided b. So the golden ratio is about 1.618 and represented by the Greek letter pi. Plainly put, it means that it's a series where each number is the sum of the two that preceded it, also known as the Fibonacci sequence. So why am I talking about numbers? Because this pattern recurs in many natural elements like flower petals, beehives, and even the shape of shells. It's an intrinsically aesthetic ratio that human eyes find pleasant to look at, and therefore it's useful when trying to decide the ratio of the objects you are depicting. It can also be used in illustration when planning the composition of your scenes, but we'll talk about that further down the line. So, when drawing a full-figure human body, the ratio that is first considered is the one of the head to the body, which is also convenient as the head is usually the first thing one draws when putting pencil to paper. If we look at a picture of the Doryphoros, we can see how the Greek canon of beauty was that of the athlete, tall, muscular, imposing. If we count how many heads can fit in this statue, we'll see that it's about 7.5. It may seem little more than 7 at a first glance, but considering the slant of the body and the bend of the knee, I think it's more like 7.5. Leonardo da Vinci also studied the proportions of the human body and reached the conclusion that the length of the outstretched arms and legs of a man should fit in a square and circle, developing the so-called Vitruvian man. As we can see from the picture of the Vitruvian man, his head fits in his body almost exactly 8 times. It's no wonder that the conventionally contemporary proportions place the head between 7.5 and 8 times within the height of the body. Generally speaking, 7 heads and a half makes for a more normal sort of figure, while 8 heads means that the legs are longer, giving the character a more heroic look. These proportions, of course, can change many times according to the style you're choosing for your characters. Let's take some examples from popular cartoons and comics. Probably one of the most popular designs of all times, Mickey Mouse obviously does not reflect the 1 head in 8 proportion, but that doesn't make him any less appealing as a character. A more realistic looking character like Marvel's Captain America instead fits the 1:8 ratio perfectly, while one of my favorite character designs ever, Will Vandom from Alessandro Barbucci's comic Witch, stands at 5.5. This quick demonstration was to show you how proportions and rules are there to serve a purpose, If the character you're creating doesn't need to respect the 1:8 head-to-height ratio and instead it benefits from a different sort of proportion to be more appealing, then go for it. Knowing the basics is useful so that you can build on it and make your own rules. But, since we're here to learn the basics, here's a quick breakdown of the 1:8 proportion set. I'm gonna start by drawing a female character of average build. The figure is approximately 7.5 heads tall. About 2 heads down from the top of the figure is the line of the nipples, therefore a little lower is where you set the line of the rib cage. About 3 heads down from the top of the figure is the navel, or belly button. About 4 heads down from the top of the figure is the pubic bone, which is approximately the halfway point of the body. The joint of the knees is in between 5 and 6 heads down the body, and the ankles are sitting at 7 heads. Below there are some rough triangles which are the feet. The wrists line up with the upper leg bone, where the thigh is joined on the hip, so to speak. The elbows line up with just above the navel, the belly button. Also, as you can see, the width of the female body can be comprised of about 2 heads or 2 heads and a half across the shoulders. As for a male body, the face will be slightly larger than a female's, but the proportion is still 7.5. So as you can see, the main key points are the same, with the difference that the elbows align more squarely with the navel, as the arms will be averagely a little longer and the hips and pubic bone a little lower. Of course, the proportions of a male body is traditionally almost inverted in comparison to that of a female one, as women tend to have narrower shoulders and waist and wider hips, while men's broadest point is the shoulders to then taper down in what can be ascribed to a carrot shape. Of course, these are complete generalizations, as nobody really fits these proportions, which is the beauty of diversity. When you have the basics down, you can play around with these proportions to draw men and women with longer torsos or really long thighs and shorter calves or bigger heads. That's entirely up to you. As a homework for this video, you can use the file titled Exercise 1 Proportions to practice drawing basic human figures with the help of the grid. I have placed 4 grids per sheet, one for the average build characters and one for the larger girth. But you can print this out as many times as you want or work out your own grid so that you can experiment with different proportions. In the next video, I'm gonna be talking a little bit more about the anatomy of the body, specifically about muscles and bones. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome to the second video in the anatomy section, where we talk about 3 fundamental aspects of drawing a human body: muscle, fat, and bone. So, why are they important? Well, mainly because they are the most visible aspects of a person's appearance from the outside. So, while anatomy in general focuses on other parts too, like the organs and the blood vessels, etc., for an artist these 3 elements are the most important. Without knowledge of the function of bones, muscles and fat, it's harder to draw believable characters and poses, so bear with me through the next part, which I'm afraid will be a bit theoretical. I think we all know that bones make up the basic structure of our skeleton. You can learn all the names of all the bones in your body. I don't know that it will make you a better artist, but it will help you with general knowledge. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know all the names of the bones in the human body, but you should know at least a few of the most important ones because they work as landmarks for measuring proportions in the body. These bones are the shoulder blade, technically called scapula, the sternum or chest bone, the pelvis, and the clavicle, which is always visible except when the arm is lifted. It will depend on each body's level of fitness and fat mass, how much these bones are evident or not. Also, the skeleton conformation isn't exactly the same in all the human bodies, so some people may show particularly predominant bones in comparison to others. As we were saying in the previous video, the main differences between a female and the male skeleton are mostly at the shoulders and in the hips. The male pelvis is longer and narrower, while the female one larger and shorter. Also, the female's chests are less broad, and the shoulders and the rib cages are averagely smaller. Move on to muscles. Muscles are the apparatus that allows us to move, but they can actually only contract. So how can that work? They cannot actively extend, though they can move or relax back into the non-contracted neutral position. What does it mean? If you look at this simplified drawing of a human arm, you can see that around the bone there are two balloons. One is the bicep, and the back one is the tricep. Each muscle in the pair works against the other to move bones at the joints of the body, the joint here being the elbow. The muscle that contracts to cause a joint to bend is called the flexor. The muscle that contracts to cause the joint to straighten is called the extensor. In this situation, with the bicep balloon empty and the tricep full, it means that the tricep is the flexor and the bicep is the extensor. When one muscle is contracted, the other muscle from the pair is always elongated. In the passage between one pose and the other, both balloons are in a similar situation, half empty, half full, right? So when the forearm is fully bent, the bicep is flexed, while the tricep is elongated. As a side note regarding the bone structure in the arm, the elbow belongs to the forearm. I used to be super confused about where to draw the elbow in complex arm poses, and here's the solution. It's always with the forearm, so it breaks from the arm. Again, I wouldn't worry about learning every single muscle name in the body, but focus on the most important ones. The muscles in the arm, deltoid, bicep and tricep, those in the leg, rectus, biceps and sartorius, and the abdominal rectus, which is basically a six-pack when you can see it and is not obscured by fat. Muscles are a great way to convey information about a character backstory and pose, but it's important to remember that they work in pairs. For example, let's look at this reference picture taken from the Sketch Daily website, the link you can find in the companion. This guy is really giving it all to move these ropes, so if you look at his right arm, the bicep is bulging while the tricep is flat and relaxed. The same thing can be noticed in the front leg in this other picture. The frontal rectus is contracted while the back muscle, the leg bicep, is relaxed. If we take a look at the third picture, we can see how the arm triceps are contracted and really popping out while the bicep is relaxed. The deltoid is also contracted in this case, and probably all of the back muscles, but we can't really see it because of the pose. I am highlighting these things because if you want to draw action poses that really convey the force of the movement, it's important to also draw the right muscle bulging. One thing I used to do as a beginner was to draw arms as lumps of sausages, without any real understanding of their shape and the importance of highlighting how the two sides, back and front, alternate. This is true not just because of anatomy, but also because of one of the main rules of character design and appeal, that is, the counterpoint of curved and straight lines. But we'll talk more about this in the figure drawing section of this course. The last but not least fundamental aspect of the body is fat. That is, the adipose areas that cover bone and muscle in specific parts of our body. Please note that even a fit person will have fat on their body, especially if it's a female character. Here's a summary of the main fat pads any average female body will have, even if they're skinny. Breast fat, Yes, breasts are pads of fat, and they behave accordingly. There should be a full chapter on drawing breasts, because they're so hard and people sometimes apply to them the physics of a balloon. They are not air balloons, they are fat and therefore respond to gravity as much as any protruding fat pad in the body. Also, since fat is usually uniformly spread across the body, if a character has big breasts, they should also have fat everywhere else. So, let's move on to the abdominal wall fat. Females have a small fat pad located in the area of the lower abs, which is useful for biology and the reason why, even if a woman is super fit and has a six-pack, she will still have a small bump and dip in the belly area, which is important to remember when you draw a sideway pose. On the side, we have 3 fat pads flanking the female figure: the flank, lateral gluteal, and outer thigh fat pads, which give the female body that roundness of hips that makes her so different from the male figure. On the inside, there are a pubic fat pad and the inner thigh fat pad. On the leg, around the knee, there are 3 fat pads that cushion the joint and are shared between male and females because they are actually useful not to break your joints. As you can see in the back view, there are some fat areas that run all around the silhouette, like the flank and lateral gluteal fat pads, and some new ones. As you can see, the whole of the female butt is surrounded by a fat pad called the posterior gluteal fat pad, which is a big difference from the male body, as we'll see in a moment. Under the glute, there's what I call the underbutt, which is technically called the inferior gluteal fat extension. To the sides of it, we can see the inner and outer fat pads, and directly below it, there's the popliteal fat pad, which again has an important function for the smooth working of the knee joint and is shared with the male anatomy too. Here's a view of the female fat areas from the side. As you can see, the female body is thoroughly cushioned all over, and that's why when we simplify character design, women are usually drawn with curved lines and round shapes. Let's see where the fat areas in the male body are instead. I've only drawn the front and back because there are only a few fat pads distributed around the body. First, we have the pectoral fat pad, which sits at the lateral end of the pectoral muscle, nestled near the armpit. Then we have the pubic fat pad, just like in the female body. And finally, from the front view, we can see the infrapatellar fat pad, which, as we were saying, has a utilitarian reason to be there. From the back, we can see the lateral flank pad, which is much smaller than the female one and doesn't wrap the entire side of the hip. In the glute area, there's a smaller gluteal fat pad only in the lower part of the butt, and then the famous underbutt. At the back of the knee, there is the popliteal fat pad, which is the same as in the female body. As you can see, there's a stark difference in the amount of fat you can find on the average female and the average male body, which is probably the biggest difference in terms of anatomy between the two, and what will affect more the shape and the silhouette when drawing. A quick note on the underbutt. I see a lot of people drawing the butt as a round line followed by a straight one to signify the thigh. To draw an instinctively more realistic figure, you should remember to include a small bump connecting the glute and the thigh. I think that's all for the quick overview of the human anatomy. As an assignment for this video, I'd like you to do 2 exercises, which you can find in the handout. One exercise, called Exercise 2 Body Map, features a blank skeleton and écorché figure of the human body. Please go over it and highlight the most important bones, muscles, and fat pads using the given maps. Use different colors to highlight different areas and write down the names to the sides. This might seem like a pointless exercise since you already have the map, but I find that actually going over it and finding the shapes help retaining the information. You can even trace the figure as many times as you want to get to know it better. In the second exercise, Muscle in Movement, I've collected several pictures of the athletes taken from figure drawing websites, and I'd like you to create a new layer on top and outline the muscles you can recognize, like I did when talking about how the muscles work. Try and think about which muscle is the extensor and which muscle is the flexor in each picture and make notes. In the next video, I'm gonna move on to the head and face and show you a method to draw faces in a way that is anatomically correct. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back. In this video, I'm gonna focus on the theory behind the anatomy of the head and face, before we move on to the practical method to draw faces with correct proportions. I'm gonna show you the main plaques that make up the skull, that is, the bone structure in the head and face. The upper front of the face, what is behind the forehead, so to speak, is made up of a large plaque called frontal bone. To the side of it, there is the parietal bone. These are two of the largest areas in the skull. Underneath the frontal bone, in the area where we can see the cheekbones, there's the zygomatic bone, which extends all the way around the orbital cavity, where we have the eyes. The zygomatic bone is an interesting one, because we can infer much about a character depending on how pronounced we draw it. Villains or older characters usually have very pronounced cheekbones, which makes them immediately more dangerous. Behind the nose, right under the frontal bone and in between the zygomatic bones, we have the nasal bone, which is usually quite small. Underneath it there is the maxilla bone, which includes the lower part of the nose, which actually is not a bone at all but cartilage, and the area above the mouth. Underneath the parietal bone, in the area where we can see the ears, there is the occipital bones. And finally, the whole lower area, including the jaw and chin, is called the mandible. This area is also super important for character design, as usually in male characters this is exaggerated to make a character more masculine, to the point where it's become a trademark of macho villains like Clayton's exaggerated jaw in Tarzan or Gaston's ginormous chin. So of course these bones are covered with other tissues, muscle and epidermis. Let's have a look at the muscle, which is usually specular, that is, it's the same on both sides of the head. On top of the frontal bone, there are two strips of muscle called frontalis. On top of the occipital bone is located the temporal muscle. Inside the orbital cavity, there is a fine layer of muscle called the orbicularis oculi muscle, which is super important for a lot of those pesky eye expressions. Believe it or not, but there is muscle even on top of the nose called the nasalis muscle, which basically allows us to move the nose like this. Super important are the minor and major zygomaticus, which again regulate a lot of the facial expressions, along with the masseter muscles underneath and the depressor anguli oris muscle, below the mouth and on top of the chin. These three macro muscles basically regulate all of the expressions of the lower part of the face. Of course, there are many more minor muscles all around the face, as it's an incredibly complex system to move, but these are the main ones. Now that we have seen scientifically how faces are made, it's time to get down to business and understand how they are actually made for the purpose of drawing them. I feel like the simplest way to understand heads is to simplify them as much as possible into three basic shapes: a circle for the top part of the face, a rectangle for the faceplate including the lower part, and another rectangle for the neck, which attaches behind through the top circle. Of course, since people aren't flat, these shapes need to be turned into their 3D version, a sphere and two cylinders. As you can see, all heads can be ascribed to these three simple volumes. I have collected a few pictures of heads in different positions from the Sketch Daily website, so I'm gonna show you how the differences in all these faces belonging to different genders and ethnicities are actually only cosmetic. They all come down to the same basic three volumes. I encourage you to try this exercise every time you have to draw something from reference, as it will help you break down the head's pose even when it's super hard and in awkward perspectives. To break down the head pose and draw them with ease, there are three steps. First, I lower the opacity of the picture and create a layer on top, where I highlight their basic volume. As we said, a sphere for the top part of the head, including the frontal bone, parietal bone, and the back of the skull. Second, I color in a cylinder, that is a round rectangle since all heads are round, covering all the front faceplate, starting from atop the eye and going down to the mandible. Third, I highlight the neck with another cylinder that connects with the sphere and provides a platform for it. The second step in this process is to identify the masses. This means creating yet another layer and with a finer brush, go in and think about the 3D shape of the sphere and cylinder and draw many fine curved lines to give a sense of how the roundness of the volumes work. Usually, I draw a heavier line to identify the center of the head and one to the midpoint underneath the eyes. This separates the face in 4 quadrants and gives you a good idea of how big these masses are in relation to each other. The third and last step in this process is to do a blockout of the head. A blockout means to identify the planes of the physiognomy of this face. How much does the nose protrude out? How large are the cheekbones or the chin? How hollow are the cheeks? All these questions can be answered by going over the reference picture and identify with geometrical blocks, therefore simplifying the real-life picture, the main face characteristics. This will give you a very geometrical, stiff and dry map of your reference picture, which of course then has to be filled out and made much rounder and more detailed to resemble a real human being. But if you turn off the opacity of the picture layer, you'll see you now have an accurate map of the face pose and main features. You can then use this map to copy the reference pictures for its likeness or simply take the pose and fill it out with face traits from your imagination. The important thing to remember when drawing faces is that, much like our planet, heads are round, not flat. This means that every element you draw on top of a face, eyes, mouth, nose, etc., has to be spread out on a round surface. As you can see in this silly quick drawing, if you simply trace 2 straight lines on a face and use them as a guide to draw eyes and mouth, the drawing will look incredibly flat and not realistic. Instead, if you mark down on the blockout map the points where the orbital cavity meets the imaginary middle face line and use that to draw the eyes, you'll see that they bend accordingly to the sphere's roundness and therefore immediately look more 3D and realistic. The same is true for the mouth, of course. You have to mark down the points where the corners of the lips meet on the curved middle line to draw them spread out on the spherical surface. We all know that every face is different, so you have to draw lots and lots of them from references before you can start drawing them straight out of your head and experiment with shapes. A good way to practice is to join the 100 Faces Challenge. This is an art challenge that some artists have been doing on social media, like on Instagram, Facebook, and even Twitter, which means that you have to draw 100 heads from reference. You don't have to do it all in one day, of course, but if you perhaps set aside a month to draw a few every day, you'll see an incredible improvement by the end of it. You can find reference pictures for different poses and expressions everywhere, even just by typing head expression drawing or something similar on Pinterest. Of course, you could also just take a bunch of pictures of yourself in different angles so you can really get creative and practice the poses you struggle with the most. Right, so for this video's assignment, I would like you guys to take the blank skull map I prepared for the lesson and color in the different skeletal plaques, as well as the muscle, and try to remember their names, like you did for the full body skeleton. For the second part of the homework, I downloaded a bunch of heads from Sketch Daily, and I would like you to go over them one by one and apply the same process I showed you. First, identify the 3D volumes, then find the masses, and finally, draw over the blockout. In the next video, I'm gonna show you a practical method to draw faces with correct proportions. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, welcome back. In this chapter, I'm gonna show you a very popular method to draw faces with realistic proportions called the Loomis method, because of the person who invented it. This method has a lot of limitations in my opinion, but it's pretty good to get your bearings as a beginner. As you progress in your practice, you'll probably discard it because it's quite rigid and you'll find proportions that work best for you and your style, along with developing an intuitive eye for drawing faces in proportion without resorting to step-by-step processes. However, as I was saying, when you start drawing, this method can be quite useful to understand the relation between the various elements in the face, where they stand in relation to each other. These are generic grids that, again, don't really reflect any real human face, but you can tweak the grid and make your own proportions to experiment with different physiognomies. Without further ado, let's get started with this step-by-step method. First, draw a rectangle, or use the shape-making tool in Photoshop to make a rectangle. This is the boundary of the grid you'll use to draw the face, therefore it will contain the shape of the face. If you make it larger, the person will have a larger face. If you make it long and thin, that will also reflect in the person's face. For the sake of standardization, let's make it about 1.5 times taller than the horizontal length. Second, draw a vertical line in the middle of the rectangle. This is the central axis of the face. Now draw 2 horizontal lines dividing the rectangle roughly in thirds. Now you have roughly 6 squares. The top 2 will serve to draw the forehead, the middle one will house the nose and eyes, while the lower ones will be used for the mouth and chin. In the midsection, but outside the grid, is also where we will place the ears. Now let's focus on the mid and lower sections and let's add to the grid, which I'm doing in purple. Trace 2 vertical lines in the middle of the squares, making 4 rectangles. Then divide these rectangles horizontally again with 2 lines each at 1/3 point. This will make each original square into 6 smaller rectangles. Starting from the middle line of each mid-square, I'm going to trace an arc, aiming for the middle external side of the top squares. This roughly outlines the temporal muscle that we saw in the previous video as a landmark. Then I'm gonna draw another arc, this time starting from the bottom left corner of the top square and going towards the middle top side. This is the upper boundary of the skull and basically of the face. You can do it on the other side too to have a rough idea of the full outline of the top of the head. Then, starting from the lower left corner of the top rectangle in the middle section, draw an arc aiming for the top of the middle line, which then will turn downwards when it reaches the other half of the face. This arc that I'm drawing in green highlights the brow line above the eyes, the protruding area above the orbital cavity. Now that we have that, draw 2 vertical lines, dividing in half the inner rectangles in the middle section. These lines define the boundaries of the nose, which I'm drawing now in dark green. The bottom of the nose will sit on the line delimiting the middle and bottom section, with the point of the nose defining a circle of various sizes according to the dimensions of the nose, whose center is exactly at the intersection of the mid and bottom section with the central axis. If you imagine building a triangle, having the lower corners set at the sides of the nose and proceeding upward towards the central axis, that dotted area is the convex space that is often in the shade when you draw a portrait. Now let's focus on the eyes. Draw a circle roughly on the intersection of the top third of the middle section and the first vertical line. This is going to be the iris of the eye. The iris corresponds to 1/3 of the full dimension of the eye, so using it as your measurement, mark down 2 lines to the sides of it as the other 2/3. Draw 2 arcs, one above the circle and the other one below, both ending where you have marked the third in blue. Please note that the top arc is going to be more curved than the bottom one. Of course, this isn't taking into account all the various types and shapes of eyes that there are in reality. This is a simplified guide. Now let's move to the bottom section and focus on the mouth. Take the first vertical line in the bottom section and highlight a length of it in between the first and middle third. Then, horizontally partition the first third in more thirds, while the middle third is divided in half. This is the guide for the top and bottom lip. The top lip is comprised in 1/3, while the bottom one occupies half of the middle section, with the chin occupying the lower half. Again, there are many different mouth shapes in the world that may not reflect these proportions, and this is just a guide. Now trace 2 vertical lines in the inner lower thirds of the bottom section. I'm drawing them in blue, and they delimit the chin, which will slightly stick out of the grid. Starting from the external end of the chin, trace a slightly curved line towards the top corner of the lower third of the middle section. This outlines the lower part of the cheekbones. Please note that the grid only accounts for the very front section of the head, so the cheekbone actually continues diagonally to the side of the face until it disappears, but we can't see it from the front. Go back to the same point down on the chin and trace another line aiming for the bottom side of the top third in the lower section. From there, turn upwards towards the same point where the cheekbone ends. This outlines the jaw. I'm shading this area because, of course, this isn't facing the viewer straight, but it's actually turning sideways around the head. So this whole area is actually a bit convex. Great! As you can see, this method is super easy to follow, and while it may not look like the best likeness of a human being, if you follow the steps and the grid to remind you of the correct process, you can then apply it to many different proportions and styles, customizing it for your needs. Let's see how it works from the side. Of course, the first step is still to draw a rectangle as the container for the grid. This time, the rectangle has to be a bit larger in width, because it needs to contain the sphere including the back of the head. Just like for the front, divide the rectangle in half and then thirds. This time you will not get squares, but horizontal rectangles. Section off an oval in the inner half of the central section. This is where the ear goes. Then roughly follow the same proportions you used for the eyes, nose, mouth and chin from the front grid. Simply, they will all stick out on one side. Now focusing on the lower section, draw 2 horizontal lines in the left-hand rectangle to divide it in thirds. Then 1 central vertical line to divide it in half. Trace an arc going from roughly around the middle line upward towards the top right corner of the lower third. This is the jaw seen from the side. From there, draw an upward stroke towards the ear, joining the mandible. From the top of the forehead inside the grid, draw an arc going towards the back of the head for the skull. When you reach downwards to complete the circle, stop just after the start of the lower third. That's where the skull connects with the neck. Now partition the middle section in the same way as the bottom section to draw the eye. The iris will sit on top of the first horizontal line, towards the outer third of the left-hand half. Around it, draw 2 arcs to close the eye. Please note that the lower line of the eye isn't straight, which is something I've seen many beginners do. It's a curved line that goes upward because the orbital cavity is a circle and not a flat square. You can also draw a couple of strokes to give the sense that the eye is sitting on top of the cheek and that there's some roundness underneath it. Going straight down from the iris, you'll find the line that delimits the bottom of the nose and below the ending of the mouth. Again, this is pretty straightforward to start getting your bearings when it comes to approaching the head from the front and sideways. If you want to put your faces in a 3D setting with different poses and perspectives, you just have to build your usual rectangle grid and then turn it into its relative 3D shape, that is, a rectangular cuboid, and connect the grid accordingly to the back of the prism. When you have built the 3D grid, you can follow the exact same steps we took in the front process, but of course following the 3D guides and different perspectives. As I mentioned before, I think that this method has some great advantages. First, it can provide a useful guide to draw faces in awkward perspectives. Like, even if I normally draw faces without a grid, sometimes I use it when I really can't figure out where things are gonna go in certain positions. And even if afterwards I change the proportions to suit my style, it's still a good guide to keep underneath on a less visible layer. Also, you can progressively experiment with the grid and change it to adapt to your own proportions. If, for example, you usually draw eyes bigger than normal as a stylistic feature, you can adapt the grid to that standard and still use it. The biggest downside to using this process, however, is that these are very irregular, standard proportions, and while they don't reflect real-life faces, using regular proportions can even be a hindrance to character design. The appeal of design is in switching up proportions in order to create more interesting shapes. By making one section of the face much bigger than the others, we can immediately convey something about the character, make it more memorable and more appealing. To do this, you have to abandon this method at some point and start experimenting. For this video's first assignment, I've created a worksheet with a front and side grid side by side. I would encourage you to draw several faces following this process step by step. For assignment number 2, something a bit more creative. Draw several small rectangle cuboids on a page. Don't worry if they're not perfect, just try and draw as many as possible in different angles and perspectives. Then try and fit faces inside these 3D grids following the same process as for the front. It's okay if most of these are gonna look weird. Right, so in the next video, I'm going to show you the practical method to draw in hands following a similar process to the one we just learned and using a grid. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back. What's every artist's worst nightmare? Yes, you've guessed it, it's drawing hands, and sometimes feet. In this video, I'm gonna show you the way that I learned to draw hands proportions using the Loomis method. Plus, I'm gonna share some anatomy tips and tricks. Of course, since we're talking about Loomis, there are some boxes involved. So first off, let's draw a rectangle. This rectangle is going to be the containing grid for the palm of the hand, without considering the thumb jutting out. Please note that in this screencast I actually drew the original rectangle too large, so my hand will end up looking very wide. That's okay though, because the beauty of this method is that it's a matter of proportions. The process is still valid, just remember to draw the starting rectangle slightly taller and more narrow than what I'm doing. Second note, I'm now drawing the hand seen from the palm, where the fingers are shorter. If you turn your hand over and look at the back of the hand, you'll notice that the fingers there seem longer from this side. That is totally normal. You just have to account for about a centimeter more when you draw the back of the hand compared to the palm, but I'm gonna show you how. So now divide the rectangle in halves. You'll end up with 4 smaller rectangles. Then divide the top left rectangle in thirds and consider the inner central third. Take it and divide it in horizontal thirds. This is where we'll place the middle finger. Now let's consider the bottom rectangles and, taking their rough measurement, add a similar sized rectangle to the left side of the hand. This is where we'll place a thumb. Trace a diagonal line in this last rectangle and then an arc starting from the top left corner and aiming up towards the top of the first third of the middle finger, then descending towards the opposite side. Following the same arc, draw another one around the middle line of the hand. This is the imaginary line in the palm where the fingers are attached. As I was saying, if you look at your hand from the back, you'll see that the fingers there seem longer, and they will usually start about a centimeter lower than from the palm, around where I'm placing this purple line. This is because from the back of the hand we can see where the first phalanx of the finger is attached to the metacarpal bones, what we usually call the knuckles. The fingers are made up of 3 segments called phalanxes. If you ideally divide the length of the finger in half, the first phalanx, the one attached to the metacarpal bone, will be as long as the second and third phalanxes put together, with the second phalanx slightly longer than the third. Also, please note how the finger isn't one uniform cylinder, but actually segmented. This means that to draw realistic fingers, especially bony or skinny fingers, you can follow the outline of the phalanxes a little more instead of drawing a smooth sausage. So moving on, the thumb follows the diagonal line jutting out at the base of the palm and reaches inside the palm to almost the central axis. Now consider the right hand bottom rectangle and divide it in half. That's roughly where the outer end of the hand, the one with the little finger, will be. Now draw the middle finger, following the thirds you already outlined as a guide for the length of the phalanxes. Of course, this is a rough guide, as the third phalanx should be slightly shorter than the second. If you divide the third phalanx of the middle finger into thirds, you'll see roughly where the other finger should reach. The index finger should reach to 2/3 of the middle finger, while the ring finger to 1/3. As you can see now, my hand is definitely too wide, because I drew the original rectangle too large in comparison to its height. The great thing about digital art and layers is that I can simply select all of the layers of the hand, press Ctrl+T, I'm using a Mac, and scale the ratio of the image to make it narrower on the side. Here, now we have a regular looking hand seen from the palm. A couple of considerations about this hand, for which I need to add the lines of the wrist. As you can see, the side with the thumb has a much more noticeable curve, while the angle on the side of the little finger is much softer. This is important to remember when you try out dynamic hand poses. Similarly, we can see that the palm of the hand is made up of 3 basic areas, kinda like 3 pads that are slightly rounded and extruding. One around the thumb, one around the middle finger and the external side, and one at the base of the fingers. These 3 pads leave sort of a hollow in the very middle of the palm. Here's a couple more notes that may be as interesting and useful for you guys as they were for me when I started approaching hands for the first time. Remember when I was talking about muscles and muscles working in pairs and how important it is to draw the correct part of the pair bulging and the other one relaxed in order to show the force of the movement? You also need to show the strength of the movement when drawing hands, but how? For example, when you draw a fist, if you draw all the knuckles on the same layer, on the same arc, you won't convey the force of the pose. If you look at your own hand making a fist, you'll see that when you put more force into it, the arc bends more, because the sides of the hand, the little finger and the thumb, press hard into the center of the hand. So if you want to draw someone throwing a forceful punch, remember to bend the arc more, to give the idea of more strength being put into the action. Another interesting tip I learned about hands is how to immediately differentiate the age of a character looking at their hands. Babies and toddlers have very short, stubby fingers. The metacarpal and the fingers are almost exactly the same length, and they have cute dots in correspondence with the knuckles to show how fat they are. As the child grows, their fingers will also grow more and lose some of the fat, until you get to an adult hand where the fingers are slightly longer than the metacarpal. Older people have lost almost all of the fat in the hand, so you can draw some lines to show the metacarpal bones underneath the skin and even some of the silhouette of the bones in the phalanx, while they have some wrinkles and loose skin around the knuckles. Of course, the length and shape of the fingers can also be a matter of style, if you're going for a more cartoony style, but as a rule of thumb, I apologize for the terrible pun, you can calibrate the amount of fat you put into the hands to show the progression of age. So as I was saying just now regarding the stylization you can adopt for hands, even though it's proportionally correct to follow the Loomis method, using the same ratio for the metacarpal and the finger length is not actually the most appealing choice that you can make. This is called having competing lengths, which in design means that the eye of the viewer tries to focus equally on both areas and can't get a clear reading of the overall shape. To diversify the lengths, you can make the fingers slightly longer than the base of the hand. This will make the hand look immediately more elegant and more appealing. Right, so for this video's exercise, I'd like you guys to take the blank grid from the Loomis method I saved as exercise 5 and draw several hands following this process. When you're done following the basic proportions, I'd like you to try and switch the length of the metacarpal and the fingers a little so that you can experiment with different ratios. In the next video, we're going to move away from anatomy and into the equally large area of perspective. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back to the first video in our perspective section. Let's start from the very concept of perspective and where this idea came from. Perspective painting may seem something that almost everybody does instinctively nowadays, but the collective human species has only started using it fairly recently. Before the 14th century, there had been little or no attempts to realistically depict the world in 3 dimensions. The artistic endeavors of humankind up until then had been certainly beautiful and impressive, but always representing things in 2 dimensions, that is, flat on an illustrative surface, and usually ordered in a way that was more symbolic than realistic. Around the 1200s, Giotto and Duccio started putting some shading in their illustration, hinting at a greater feeling of depth, but still the backgrounds were flat. Around 1415, Florentine architect Filippo Brunelleschi discovered, or perhaps it's more correct to say figured out, the concept of linear perspective. As the story goes, he apparently created a painting of the Baptistery in Florence and gathered a crowd in the square in front of the actual building. Then he gave the painting to a random person in the crowd, but the painting was turned away from the person, so they could only see the back of the canvas. The canvas itself had a small hole through which the person could see the actual baptistry in front of them. Then Brunelleschi raised a mirror in front of the person and suddenly they could see the baptistry in the painting, which looked exactly the same as the baptistry in real life, as the hole was placed precisely on the vanishing point on the horizon. After this exciting demonstration of linear perspective, the concept gained notoriety in Italy and elsewhere, becoming a staple of Renaissance art and still used widely to this day. The School of Athens by Raffaello, one of my favorite frescoes from the Renaissance, is a great example of the maturity of linear perspective after less than 100 years from that first experiment. In this fresco, set in the Apostolic Palace in the Vaticano, we can see the main philosophers, scientists and thinkers of ancient Greece, but sometimes represented by people who were contemporary to Raffaello, like noblemen, clergymen, and even Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo, who had taught Raffaello about linear perspective, was actually portrayed here as Plato, the central figure on the left, walking alongside his student Aristoteles. The fresco obviously wants to draw a parallel between the excellence of classical Greek and Renaissance culture, but it's always been particularly dear to me because it includes Hypatia, one of the most brilliant minds in history and one of my main role models growing up. Aside from the subjects though, it's important to note how the linear or central or one-point perspective works here. When using linear perspective, we assume that looking ahead there is one point on the horizon where all the lines that define the objects in the scene will eventually meet. To use this type of perspective, you simply have to define where your vanishing point is on the horizon, then create a guide by making all of the lines in the floor and the ceiling, called orthogonal lines, converge towards that point and then adapt all of the solids in the scene accordingly. As you can see here, I'm quickly adding a cube into the scene, first drawing the front face and then continuing the solid plane lines towards the vanishing point until I can find how this cube actually appears in this perspective. As much as linear perspective is a great discovery, so much actually that painter Gianpaolo Lomazzo once claimed that he would rather die than disregard perspective, it has several big limitations when trying to depict the world in a realistic way. The main one being that you can only use it for objects that are actually facing the viewer from the front. In order to depict solids that are sitting at an angle from the viewer, it's necessary to use two-point perspective, also called angular perspective. This method was first recorded in 1505 by Jean Pellerin in his book De Artificiali Perspectiva, which was then perfected in 1560 by Jean Cousin, who also offered methods to create appropriate foreshortening, that is, the modification of body and object proportions in order to fit the given perspective angle. However, angular perspective didn't become common practice until the 1700s and was limited to architects and more technical drawings. As you can see in this etching by Piranesi from 1772, angular perspective is also called two-point perspective because it uses two vanishing points on the horizon, parallel to each other, to which the orthogonal lines of the planes of the solids in the scene converge. Three-point perspective, or multi-point perspective, is an evolution of angular perspective that can be put in place when looking at a scene from a particularly high or low angle, often wanting to give a sense of magnificence to the objects in the scene, if pictured from below, or smallness, if pictured from above. The third vanishing point in three-point perspective is not placed on the horizon line as seen with the 2 points and 1 point perspective. Instead, it's placed under or above the horizon line. Often, the bottom vanishing point is placed off of the picture plane. In this print by Escher, one of the most famous designers of the 1900s, known for the impossible perspectives and constructions that he put in his pieces, you can easily see how there are two vanishing points on the horizon for two axes of the planes of the image, and then a third at the bottom. Useful to give us the illusion of seeing this fort from above, either from a much higher building or from a mountain. Going one step further and adding vanishing points, we can get to 5-point perspective or round perspective. This type of perspective works for bird's eye view or worm's eye view, and it allows you to depict everything from north to south and from nadir to zenith. 100 degrees of the scene in front of you can be depicted this way, creating some fun effects, especially if you are trying to convey a sense of being spaced out in an illustration. As you can see in this quick grid I'm building, the blue lines represent the central axis. The green lines, starting from the center of the intersection of the axis, are the lines of the ground, or the horizon line in the sky, while the red curved lines are directed towards the vanishing points at north, south, nadir, and zenith. Moving away from geometrical grids, there are two other types of perspective that are a bit softer in my opinion, and that are probably gonna be the most useful to you after you've learned the hard facts and want to settle on something not so schematic. One is atmospheric perspective, also called aerial, which conveys depth through variations of values, lights and darks, colors and clarity of elements. This type of perspective is, for example, used in the portrait of the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. As you can see, clearly Leonardo used the linear perspective grid for the background. But then the final look is a lot more organic and softer than the School of Athens or other Renaissance paintings. In this, the illusion of the background being far away from the person in the foreground is given by value and clarity. As I was mentioning, the woman in the front is very clear, saturated, with a lot of contrast between the darks and lights on her figure. The more you move backward, the more the contrast fades, elements become more indistinct and desaturated. This gives a soft illusion of three-dimensionality very suited to portraits. Finally, I'd like to just say a word regarding intuitive perspective. This is basically what happens when, after you've studied perspective and drawn a million perspective grids, you stop using them. Don't get me wrong, perspective grids are important and useful, especially if you're trying to work out a scene with a weird angle for an illustration or a comic book or a storyboard. However, most of the times I only draw the basic grid with the vanishing points and then work out the elements in the scene intuitively, not actually making all of the lines converge with a ruler. I hope you found this little history of perspective useful to grasp the basics, and I would like you to spend some time practicing drawing solids with different perspective grids. I've prepared several perspective grids for you to practice. They're called exercise 6_ name of each type of perspective. For example, in the linear perspective grid, I have given you the horizon line and the vanishing point. So you should draw one face of the geometrical figure, like a cube to start with, and then trace the lines starting from the figure's vertices towards the vanishing point. When you have done so, then you'll find the correct shape of the cube in this particular grid. You can draw several different cubes and cuboids per grid, ideally as many as you can fit for each grid. If you are using Photoshop, you can easily trace straight lines by tapping on the vertex that you want to join, then raising your pen or mouse, press down on Shift on a Mac or Alt on a Windows, and then tap with the pen or mouse on the vanishing point that you want to reach. This will trace a light straight line between the 2 points. The same thing applies for the Angular Grid worksheet. As you can see here, I'm drawing another cuboid. You can easily find the basis for the cuboid by looking where the orthogonal lines from the 2 vanishing points cross. Then you draw some vertical lines to find the height of the solid that you want to draw, and then again connect those vertices to the vanishing points. In the 3-point perspective worksheet, you'll find the horizon line and then a vertical line that represents the vertical axis of the 3rd vanishing point. Aside from that little difference, the assignment is the same. Draw as many cuboids as possible in each grid. Finally, I've created one big 5-point grid for you guys to practice solids from a bird's eye view. The blue grid represents the lines connected to the horizon, while the green ones are the ones connecting north and south and nadir and zenith. I hope you have tons of fun with these, and don't worry, there is a reason to really get to know these perspective grids, I promise. In the next video, I'm gonna show you why they are important and how can they be used when drawing characters. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back. In this video, I'm gonna show you how you can practically apply the perspective knowledge we developed in the last lesson to draw complex character poses. This isn't really figure drawing, more like getting used to simplifying complex poses before we get into gesture and figure drawing. So let's get started. As usual, I have saved a few images from Sketch Daily so that we can use them for reference. In this picture, for example, we can see a man standing almost sideways, holding a cross slightly above his shoulder. Even though this isn't an action pose, there are already several problematic elements to approach for a beginner. First of all, the slant of the body in 3/4 means that we have several body masses piled up in front of one another, which makes it harder to separate the skeleton pose. Secondly, the man is wearing a long coat, which means that we'll have to do a fair amount of imagining to understand what's going on underneath. Third, hats are complex objects, and I for one could not draw them at all when I started. This kind of cursory assessment of the most difficult areas to break down is the first step when trying this exercise, I think. The second step is to simplify each large body mass, head, torso, pelvis, legs, arms, etc., into boxes or cuboids, and then follow the perspective of those boxes to build a perspective grid around the character and better understand its positioning in space. It may seem daunting, but that's exactly what you've been doing as exercise for the last video, simply drawing boxes in perspective grids. So believe me, you can do it! So sometimes I invert these two steps and draw the perspective grid before I simplify the character's volumes. It really depends on the type of perspective that needs to be implemented in the scene. In this case, the perspective grid looks to me to be a simple linear perspective with the vanishing point somewhere far away behind the character, almost to the center. So I'm gonna build the grid first and then make the boxes on each major body mass later. I'm gonna lower the opacity on the original reference, create a new layer on top, and choose a visible color like red to draw the grid. As I was saying, this grid has one vanishing point. You need to draw it around the character, kind of like a cage. And as you do that, you'll notice that you seem to understand the physicality of the body in space a lot better than before. The line of the horizon is somewhere lower than the center of the character, so of course the more you go up, the more the orthogonal lines will aim towards the floor. Understanding this, really seeing it on screen, will help you understand better the volumes of the hat, especially. So now that I'm done drawing the perspective grid around the character, it's time to simplify the body masses into more cuboids. This is very similar to the practice we have done with the volumes in the head. And speaking of heads, I'm gonna start exactly with taking the head and drawing the front face of a cuboid roughly on top of it. Following the perspective lines of the grid, these cuboids' faces need to go slightly downward, aiming for the horizon vanishing point. The hat will have an even steeper angle towards the floor, as it's following the same orthogonal lines. Then I'm gonna focus on the torso, which is ascribable to a slanted cuboid. Because of the pose, the front arm and shoulder are raised and the back shoulder is lowered, the back of the torso is slanted towards the floor at a slightly steeper angle than it would be if it simply followed the perspective grid. This is actually one of the challenges of drawing character poses in a grid. While the cuboids that you drew for the perspective exercise were all following the grid at the same angle, when you draw a character, some parts will have different vanishing points, especially if it's an action pose. After the torso, it's time to simplify the pelvis. As you can see, the back of the torso and the pelvis are hinting at crossing orthogonal lines, as they are compressed against each other to allow the aperture of the front of the body. Sometimes I draw a circle in correspondence of the belly, in between the torso and the pelvis, but in this case I wanted to show that area without anything in front. Then it's time to focus on the legs, which are aiming towards the vanishing point to the back, so they're fairly straightforward. The only issue is presented by the fact that the feet are pointing inwards and therefore will have two different angles. To build the feet, I usually use a circle on top of the ankles and then some triangle-shaped cuboids for the feet proper. I'm gonna turn off the opacity of the original photo reference, and as you can see, the simplified structure of the body is very clear in terms of the body volumes and how it's set in space, which is super helpful for developing both an eye for the body masses and for intuitive perspective. I'm gonna demo one more block breakdown with a more difficult perspective grid. In this picture, we can see a woman standing at a juxtaposed slant, with all the weight of the body on the left leg, the straight one, and the right leg bent in a way that gives grace and movement to this pose. The shoulders, as I said, are juxtaposed to the hips, which means that the left shoulder is bending lower and the right one is sitting higher, creating kind of an X. The difficulty of this grid is that I suspect it has two vanishing points. That is, the box enveloping the character is sitting at an angle in relation to the viewer. I'm gonna quickly sketch what I think the box is going to look like, and then I'll move on to the individual volume boxes so that I can check if my prediction was correct. In terms of the simplification of the body volumes, I'm gonna follow the same steps I took in the previous demo, focusing on the head, then the torso, pelvis, legs, and arms. Following the orthogonal lines highlighted by the simplified boxes, I can now see that indeed this character pose is inscribed inside an angular perspective grid. The last step in this exercise is to do exactly what we have done before, but this time freehand. So for this last picture, I'm not gonna draw the boxes right on top of the images. Rather, I'm going to keep the image to one side and try and work out the shapes by eye. Don't worry if the proportions aren't quite right when you first start doing this. Moving from tracing the boxes on top of the reference photo to drawing them by hand is as difficult as starting to use perspective in general. So it will take time and many attempts before you can do this to any degree of satisfaction. When you are doing this freehand, just remember to follow the same structure as before, starting from the head, and then to really think about the simplest shape you can ascribe to each volume and figure out the way this shape is tilted and where it's aiming in terms of vanishing point. When you have finished drawing the pose, lengthen the orthogonal lines of each volume to figure out the perspective grid and make the relative adjustments. Great! So of course, the assignment for this video is going to be to follow this process as many times as you wish. I have prepared 2 sets of images already for you to use as reference. However, I encourage you to go on Sketch Daily or some other life drawing website and repeat the process as many times as needed to feel comfortable. In the next video, we're going to explore a similar process to draw hands in perspective. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back. In this practice video, I'm gonna show you some tips and tricks that make up my process when drawing hands in perspective, difficult poses or even just normal poses that somehow seem difficult at first. The first thing to remember is that, as usual, hands and fingers are 3D objects. If you look at the hand in the reference picture, the knuckles aren't all on the same level. They are all on different planes or layers in relation to the camera. A good way to really understand this is to quickly draw some circles or half circles or boxes representing the fingers and roughly place them in relation to one another. You can then number the half circles to solidify in your mind what is the order or the layers. I call this quick process priority check, and you can do it quickly before approaching any reference picture to sort of give yourself a mental order of how the fingers are spread out in the 3D space. So this priority check is the first step in the process of drawing hands in perspective. You don't always have to do it, especially if the fingers are spread out or the placing is obvious, but it's particularly useful when the hand is half closed or the fingers are all on top of each other. In this reference photo, for example, the order of the layers in perspective is pretty straightforward, so I'm gonna skip this step. Step 2 is to proceed with the dot method. You simply lower the opacity of the reference picture, create a layer on top, and place a small dot on each finger, creating landmarks for the shape of the hand pose. When you've done this, create yet another layer and proceed to simplify the hand volumes in a blockout. This is exactly the same process we did for the head and most recently for the full body figure. Just try and simplify the fingers and the metacarpal in basic cuboids and see how they stand in the 3D space and in relation to one another. This is really useful to avoid losing volume and inadvertently turning the fingers into flat sausages. When you're done with the blockout, there's another check you can perform to see if you got the volumes and space correctly. As you can see, I'm highlighting all the negative space around the hand. Negative space is basically the areas around the figure that are not occupied by anything. By coloring in this space and then confronting it with the hand you're drawing, you can see if you moved something in the wrong place accidentally. So I'm gonna take a different reference photo, scale it down, and show you the process again by drawing freehand. So first thing, dot method. I'm placing dots on the tip of the index finger, but also on the joint of the first and second phalanx, since the other fingertips aren't visible in this case. I'm also putting a dot at the base of the palm to give some extra landmark, which you can also totally do when you're starting. You then simply duplicate this layer and drag it a little farther away so that you can quickly check between the freehand drawing and the reference photo and assess how the 2 sets of dots compare with one another. Next step is the blockout. So I usually start by approaching the volumes delimiting the dots and fleshing out the general outer shape of the pose. I'm starting here with the thumb and then moving around counterclockwise to define the outer boundaries of the hand. You can of course approach this whichever way is most comfortable for you. When you're done with the blockout, create another layer and highlight with a bright color like green the negative space on the reference photo. Then duplicate the layer and move it on top of your blockout to check if you're keeping the volumes and the distance between the volumes accurate. I was quite surprised to see that my blockout was pretty accurate, aside for the area at the base of the palm on the little finger side. so I adjusted that real quick and I'm ready for the next and final step. Lower the opacity of the block-out layer, create a new layer on top and change the color to something neutral like black. Then proceed to flesh out the actual final render of this study. In this case, you're gonna have to smooth out the geometric shapes of the blockout and add all the little wrinkles and details that make up a real hand. You may have noticed that my brush isn't working at full opacity. This is because I tapped on the little icon in the top bar in between the values of opacity and flow. By selecting that icon, you're linking the opacity of the brush to the pressure of the stylus on the graphic tablet. This is a great feature that is present in many digital drawing softwares that makes the brush look more realistic and natural, like a real-life pencil or pen. So when you're done with the render of your hand pose, you can move on and do another million of these. I'm joking, but not really. Just like with anything in drawing, you have to practice a lot. For this video's assignment, I've already put together 4 reference pictures for you to apply this process to. Try and apply each step of the process on top of the reference pictures, and then freehand. If you feel like going overboard, get some more hand poses on Sketch Daily or Pinterest, or even take some pictures of your own hand if you're feeling creative. In the next video, I'm gonna move on to figure drawing, so we're gonna start practicing a lot of poses and organic shapes. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back! In this video, we are finally approaching gesture drawing, or life drawing as it can also be called. Life drawing is really at the heart of drawing the human figure, and the most important step for improving your draftsmanship. There simply is no way that you can get better at drawing if you don't do it regularly. I started my artistic journey by doing gesture drawing from reference every morning for at least half an hour. I somewhat stopped this routine down the line because of work and deadlines, but whenever I get back to it, I realize how much I miss it and how good it would be for me to pursue it on a daily basis. Life drawing is basically that 30 minutes of physical exercise you know you should be doing. Ironically, most of the times it's exactly like going to the gym, as in, you don't feel like going, but if you do, afterwards you feel great. So please, just do it. As good as it is, approaching gesture drawing in real life with an actual model in front of you, or through the internet with pictures or in videos, can be kinda intimidating. There's so much to take in: the pose, the anatomy, the perspective, that your eye, and therefore your hand, doesn't really know where to go. So in this section, I'm gonna break down life drawing with the help of a few manuals that have shaped my knowledge deeply, and try and make sense of the whole process. We have already talked about anatomy and perspective, so that when I mention these concepts in these videos, you'll know what I'm talking about. However, for the most part, at least at the beginning, anatomy will not be central to our life drawing practice. I mean, of course anatomy is central since we are drawing humans in specific poses, but I will not focus on it as if illustrating an anatomy book. Life drawing is about force and movement. It's about capturing in a few short minutes the dynamics of a pose and transfer it to paper, even if the anatomy isn't quite right and the render is half finished. It's more important that you capture the essence of the pose than accuracy of the sartorius muscle. So please keep that in mind when following along the practice videos. Before moving into practice, I'd like to touch upon a few key concepts of gesture drawing so that we're on the same page in terms of vocabulary and the order of the topics. First of all, life drawing means drawing life. It means being interested and curious about the stuff happening around you. As I was saying, you may join a club in your town or do life drawing sessions with models in a studio, or you may do it online, but sometimes even going to cafes and other public spaces and just sketch can be great practice, especially since people will move randomly and you won't have a set time to finish your drawing. Observation is the key to all these different settings. It means not only looking at things, but looking analytically. Just like in the 2 previous videos, I told you to look at the reference photos and analyze what would be the most difficult areas to draw, or make a plan to understand the order of the layers in the perspective grid. This type of looking means that you are absorbing what you're seeing and elaborating it. This way, when you go to the page and start sketching, you're doing so from an informed perspective. You aren't just barging ahead without a plan. Observation is also fundamental to build our inner reference folder. When you're life drawing, you have a model to study, so you can learn how to draw a specific body part in a specific pose, which you may use again in an illustration at a later date. When you're working on your own illustrations, you may then change the original study, add things or take things out, change the style a little, exaggerate. All these things are available to you as a product of your imagination, but these changes will be flimsy if they don't stand on the solid ground of the life drawing practice. Another important aspect of life drawing that you have to take care of before you start drawing is your tools. Some people prefer traditional media, some people prefer digital. Personally, I'm a digital artist, and I admit I feel a little intimidated by traditional art. This said, it's probably best to start with pencil and paper for several reasons. First, if you know how to draw in traditional, you can do it digitally. In digital art, we have many tricks and shortcuts that make the groundwork of drawing a little easier. Also, you have endless retakes. You can simply Ctrl-Z and start over without wasting space. You can select certain areas of the body and scale them or transform them if you realize that they look odd at the end of a sketch. You can zoom in and zoom out at your leisure, which may seem like a small thing, but I can tell you how many times I've tried to pinch zoom on my sketchbook like I do on my iPad. So yeah, learn and practice keeping a sketchbook even if you work mostly on digital for color. It will keep you on your toes and will force you to be more precise and more conscious of your own mistakes. If you can, you could even get a proper easel for life drawing studio sessions. As Samantha Youssef, the author of one of my favorite books on the subject, suggests. The main advantage to getting an easel is that it will force you to stand upright and use your whole arm to draw, which is preferable, especially for gesture drawing. As I was saying, in this type of sketching, it's important to catch the force of the movement, the rhythm of it, and to do so, it's best to use the pencil or charcoal as an extension of your arm. So instead of keeping the pencil or pen at a 90-degree angle to your hand, it's best to put your full hand around it. If you have a graphic tablet that you can tilt up on your desk, you might consider doing that. For example, I keep my Cintiq standing upright, mimicking an easel, and it improves the flow of my sketching as well as my posture. A question I often get asked is where can you practice life drawing? As I mentioned, you can arrange a life drawing club if you have some artist friends who'd like to pitch in to pay for a professional model, or you could even take turns at modeling, although that may be embarrassing and impractical if you don't feel comfortable doing nude or don't have many ideas for interesting poses. You could try and contact art schools in your areas, and they usually host periodic life drawing sessions. If you want to practice daily, there are a plethora of websites that offer reference photos or even video sessions on YouTube and Vimeo. Simply Google life drawing sessions and you'll find tons. My favorite are the Café Croquis sessions on Vimeo and the New Masters Academy channel on YouTube. The way I'm going to approach gesture drawing in this section of the course is to take you through the following concepts step by step in a series of practice videos. First of all, we're going to spend a little time talking about lines. When doing gesture drawing, we are not trying to create a clear line art like in a comic book. However, it's still important to put force in our lines so that they convey the strength of the movement and we don't end up with a million weak lines that don't mean anything. We have already done some practice with blocking out shapes, but we'll do even more. Blocking is useful to understand the true shape of a pose, especially if foreshortening is involved. You remember, we mentioned foreshortening with regards to the two-point perspective, and it's pretty much always involved when drawing a model. Foreshortening happens whenever we see a body part in a perspective that makes that body part appear shorter than it should be. Blocking and shapes also help with design and the general appeal of the figure. After that, we'll talk about and learn to find the line of action of a character pose. Sometimes it's called mainline or directional force. It's the energy that connects the solid masses of the body, torso, pelvis, etc., to the ground. This imaginary line starts from the head of the character and goes through the center of the body, giving it strength and movement. It's important that you start practicing recognizing the line of action in any reference picture you see. The directional axis is another very important imaginary line we learn to recognize in poses to help us understand how they are balanced. This axis identifies the diagonal tilt of the shoulders and the hips, for example, which are usually in a relation called contrapposto. Contrapposto is an Italian term that indicates the oblique force between shoulders and hips and is a very pleasing way of showing force and rhythm in a figure. This will introduce the concepts of weight, mass, and rhythm. These are all elements to take into account when trying to replicate a character pose. Having identified the main line and directional axis in a character, we then have to look how the various body masses are balancing and where the weight of the body is pulling. Usually, one leg is bearing more weight than the other, so in that case, the rest of the body will adjust accordingly. The allotment of weight also depends on the directional and applied forces present in the body. The relation between all forces in the pose creates rhythm. Rhythm is the reaction, the passive force used by the body to adjust itself to the directional strong forces coming from the movement of muscles. The last part of this process will be design. Adding the element of design to figure drawing means adding the anatomy, the correct proportions, the perspective, all of the aspects that dress up the gesture of the pose to become a drawing of a specific human being as opposed to a random mannequin. This whole process should take only minutes, with the first part regarding forces and gesture drawing lasting only 30 seconds and the part with the shapes and design up to 2 minutes. Again, I realize that this might seem like a lot to tackle, but practice video by practice video, I hope you'll be able to build up your own process and create a solid workflow for gesture drawing that will eventually allow you to improve your draftmanship drastically and speed up your sketching time. So if you're ready, let's get started. Hi guys, and welcome to the first step in the process of mastering life drawing. This video will give you a preparatory but necessary building block to life drawing, an understanding of lines and blocking. First, let's talk about lines. A great book called Force Dynamic Life Drawing by Michael Mattesi was what made me understand the difference between tracing a lot of lines on a piece of paper instead of drawing with directional force. Everybody traces lines in a different way. Some people draw tentatively, putting down a million short, hesitant strokes that lack force. Some people instead draw forcefully, but keep going up and down without keeping one direction, and therefore not really conveying the force of the movement. Naturally, I'm part of this last category, and I usually end up with a million lines on my sketches. What you need to train yourself to do, however, is to look at the page, think about the movement and the direction of the movement you want to convey, and then trace a single strong line in that direction. This line has a start, an apex, and an ending, where the force is consumed and disappears. It tells a story and leads the eye of the viewer in concert with the movement of the character. Of course, it's okay if you draw more than one to start with and you don't get it perfect the first time. Just start by trying to trace the line in the correct direction, and with practice, you'll be able to do it. Another important note to be made is that when we draw a character pose, we're doing it with the help of lines to define its outlines. However, we are not drawing the lines per se. We're just using them as a way to contain the form of the model. What I mean to say is that when you trace a line, you always have to think about the 3D shape that is underneath to give it form and strength. As you can see here from this first rectangle I'm drawing, it's weak because it has no substance. This other one, instead, I'm drawing thinking of it as a torso, and therefore filling it in my mind's eye with the 3D shape a torso would have. If you draw a shape with lines that lack form, no amount of shading will make it a stronger sketch. Shading and rendering only help a strong line to get even better. So since we're on the subject of shapes, let's talk about blocking. We have done some blocking exercises before, simplifying elements of the human body to understand their basic 3D shapes in perspective and such. However, this is a different type of blocking, a tool that can be used in life drawing exercises to strengthen your mind's eye and make you able to instinctively assess the size and positioning of body elements in relation to one another. Basically, this isn't something you do in a life drawing session, but rather an exercise you should do before, separately, until you have acquired an understanding of measuring and seeing shapes with your mind's eye. Blocking can help with a variety of aspects, like seeing the human body as made up of simpler shapes, understanding how a normal limb can become shorter or seem larger because of foreshortening, measuring body parts, and creating better design. Let's see these aspects one by one, starting from seeing shapes. I've taken this image from the Line of Action website, like those I will use later. Please note that to improve in life drawing, there's no substitute to seeing the nude human body. So I hope you don't mind artistic nudity, because there is a lot of it in this section of the course. A good way to approach blocking for figure drawing is to start with the body parts that most resemble simple geometric shapes and that are attached to the core of the figure. This means usually the head, torso, and pelvis. Leave out the parts moving away from the core structure for later, as you don't have enough elements to properly place them at the start. Building from those core elements that you have identified, look for positive and negative space. Negative space being the empty space without limbs or anything, to give you an idea of how the body parts that are separated from the core are placed. Then use easily defined shapes, like the thigh and leg in this case, to measure similar shapes that may be separated from the core. Finally, you can also trace vertical and horizontal lines to make a grid and check that the elements are still in line with each other. Moving to the second item on our list. Blocking is good for foreshortening because it lets you check whether your inner eye was correct. Let me explain. As you can see in this super quick sketch of this pose, the thighs of this model are foreshortened because they are facing the camera and therefore look shorter than they actually are because of the perspective. However, my mind knows that thighs should be longer than this, and so when I go to draw them, I inevitably tend to draw them longer, more similar to the anatomical shape. If you go and fill in their blocked out shape on the reference picture and then compare it to the one you've drawn, you'll see how much you've missed the mark and be able to amend it. Blocking is also good for measuring different parts of the body and take these measurements as reference to build more on the original structure. Here I'm quickly trying to judge by eye how big is the negative space between the forearm and the head, the hand and the head, and the dip of the torso and hip. I then proceed to duplicate this layer and measure it on top of the actual reference photo. I was actually quite accurate with the top two, however I missed the mark with the torso indentation. That was actually smaller than I calculated. You can assess how big one part is by comparing it with the others. Finally, if you can see the overall shape of an element and give it body, you can create better design. This is especially true for hair and other elements that are more ephemeral. By blocking out the hair of this photo, for example, I can treat it as a body part like any other, a thigh or a forearm. This gives the hair more volume, and so when I go in to render it with individual strands and locks, it has more vitality and is more appealing instead of looking flat. For this video's assignment, I have saved a few life drawing poses from Sketch Daily that I would like you to block out. As you can see in this example, I would like you to do this by eye, not on top of the photo reference. Following the process I mentioned, start with the simplest shapes that you feel you can control, head as a circle and torso. When you have those, you can compare the negative space of the torso in the reference picture and then repeat it on the freehand blockout. You can use the same method with elements that are made more complicated by foreshortening, like I'm doing in red. By tracing something difficult on the reference photo and then repeating it on your freehand drawing, you can get a big help while avoiding the actual tracing. By now, I would like you to stay off the reference pictures and try and do these exercises by eye. It's hard, I know, but at some point we need to learn to draw without crutches. You can also use similar body parts as measuring references, like I did here with the thigh and the arm. And the alternation of measuring negative and positive space is super useful when it comes to interlocked shapes, like it's happening here with the legs and the feet in this case. So I hope you have fun with these, and I will see you in the next video where we'll talk about the line of action. Take your time and see you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back. In this video, you're going to learn how to identify the line of action and the directional axis of a model posing for a live drawing session. I mentioned before that the line of action, or main line, is the imaginary line passing through the core of the body, identifying the energy running through the movement of the pose. To find it, you can look at the solid masses of the body and see where they are facing. The solid masses are the ribcage and the pelvis. By highlighting them on top of the picture, you can already see that a curved line is emerging, connecting them. If you continue this line until it reaches the ground, you have found the line of action. The main line usually follows two patterns, resembling either an S or a C. In this case, it looks more like an S. Please note that the line of action doesn't necessarily always follow the supporting leg as it does in this picture. However, it's always passing within the silhouette of the body, as it goes through the middle, at its core. Let's see some more examples. As we said, the main line is simple, either a C or an S. Even with poses that look complex, like this one with the sitting man, if you struggle to see it, simply go back to the solid masses and you'll find it. In this case, it's a C, while in this other, it's an S. If we look at this image over here, the solid masses are pretty straightforward, forming the beginning of a C shape. However, you might get confused by the front leg. Should you follow it or should you not? The answer is no. It's best to avoid too many bends when you draw the line of action, as every time you take a turn, the movement loses some of its momentum, just like when driving a car. So in this case, the line of action follows the back leg, and in this picture of the man lunging, it's the same. You want to ignore the front bent leg, even though it's the supporting one, and follow the smooth ending given by the back leg. Now let's have a look at this vintage picture of a woman shooting a bow. It's kinda a hard picture to spot the line of action for, because there's so many bends and also because it feels like there's something inherently unbalanced about it, isn't it? Somehow, it feels like this lady is about to topple over with her bow. I'm gonna quickly sketch over it and move the layer away from the picture so that we can analyze what's going on. The reason why it feels so unstable is because the line of action is passing behind the supporting leg, and the front leg is just sort of there, hanging, not really complementing the movement or doing anything to help balance the weight. A better stance for this type of pose would be for the supporting leg to move slightly backward and for the front leg to move forward, allowing the line of action to flow straight in the middle. Even better, it would be for the front leg to be straight, adding a measure of grace to this pose. Let's have a quick word about directional and applied forces. A directional force is a force created by the pull of gravity, so the main line is a directional force in a way. However, the body applies its own force through the movement of muscles to oppose the directional force and, in a way, to create it. When you identify the line of action in a pose like this, you can also guess where the applied force is. The applied force is invisible, but here in the picture you can feel it's in the supporting leg pushing upward and in the ribcage being thrown forward and upward. This is where the applied force of the body created the movement and therefore the line of action. Let's have a look at the second item in this class, the directional axis. To find the directional axis, you first need to look for the slant of the shoulders and the hips. Secondly, you can find the correlation between the bottom of the ribcage, the elbows, knees, ankles, etc., etc. But these are secondary. The most important correlation is in the shoulders and hips, that together create the main counterbalance in the body. To correctly spot the axis, you need to look for certain anatomy landmarks, as we talked about in the anatomy series. For the shoulders, look for the tips of the clavicle, while for the hips, look for the iliac crest and the top of the pelvis. The reason why the shoulders and hips adjust themselves in this contrapposto, this counterpose, is because when the body is straight, it's like this circle, symmetrical and balanced. If you take away one half of the circle, it's as if the torso and the whole body are all sitting at the same angle, falling over. If you add the half circle though, you can find a new balance. As an assignment for this video, I've compiled a series of pictures of life drawing models in various poses for you to recognize the line of action and the directional axis. I would like you guys to repeat the exercise twice. The first time, draw the line of action and the axis directly on top of the image. The second time, move the image aside and practice drawing the line of action and the directional axis. Remember that these two actions should only take a matter of seconds when you practice life drawing, so you should practice until you are completely comfortable in recognizing and identifying them at a glance. I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk about mass, weight and rhythm when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back. In this video, we'll see how a topic we approached before, that of the body masses, relates to weight and ultimately the general balance of the figure. We know that the solid masses of a body are primarily the torso and pelvis, and that for humans to stand on their feet without toppling over, they have to be balanced along the center of gravity, that is, where the force of gravity bears down to the object. We know instinctively that if a large mass like this is stacked away from the center of gravity on top of a series of smaller masses, it will fall. It's the same for the human body. If the torso, for example, is stacked at an angle to the pelvis away from the center of gravity, the human will fall face first. Unless, of course, you add something else underneath it to bear the weight of the masses above and serve as a counterbalance. When masses are balanced in the body, you get a more harmonious figure, and at the same time, a clearer sense of where the weight is distributed among the body. This sense of weight is very useful in figure drawing, because it immediately makes the figure look more real, more believable. Let's have a look at this photo reference. As you can see, the torso is moved far away from the pelvis, putting the body in a state of unbalance. Adding a leg underneath the torso provides a counterbalance to the pose, and this leg will bear 100% of the weight of the body. To check if the location of the leg is believable, you can draw a straight line starting from the center of the clavicle to the ground. This is called a plumb line, and it's also used in construction to check if you're putting things up straight. The plumb line will ensure that your character's center of balance is correct. However, this may not be the case with characters interacting with objects or other characters. Let's look at this picture of a man bearing a sphere, for example. In red, I'm highlighting the center of gravity of the whole figure, man and sphere together. In green, there's the man's plumb line, starting from his clavicle. To judge how heavy an object is, you simply have to look at how much holding this object is moving the man's plumb line from the center of gravity. Basically, the heavier an object is, the more a person has to counterbalance with their own body weight to keep balanced. In this quick sketch I'm drawing of a stick figure holding a ball, the center of gravity and plumb line coincide. This means that the ball isn't heavy at all. If the stick person has to throw his torso backward and bend the pelvis upward to balance and therefore move their plumb line away from the center of gravity, it means that the ball has gotten much heavier. Let's analyze this image that we have seen before in light of our new knowledge. First, identify the line of action, then the directional axis, then the plumb line, which falls on top of the back leg, the weight-bearing leg. In this case, I'd say that the back leg is bearing almost all of the weight of this pose, as is exactly in the center of gravity. Aside from the main line of action, there are many other forces at play in the body. We have already seen that they are called directional forces, and that they come into play whenever you see a tensed muscle imprinting a force on the movement of the pose. Directional forces are strong, aggressive forces, and you can see here on the upward thrust of the torso, in the force imprinted by the back leg into the hip to contrast the gravitational force, etc. Rhythmic energies are the opposite. They are a soft, passive force that is in a complementary relation to the main line and the strong forces. Just like in the way that muscles work in pairs, our body works between states of tension and relaxation, action and inaction. Rhythmic energy makes a pose more harmonious. It ties together all of the strong forces. After taking care of all the essential lines like the line of action, directional axis, etc., when you draw a pose, you have to consider what are the other directional forces at play, usually drawing them with strong, straight strokes. And also where are the rhythmic energies, usually drawing them with lighter, flowing gestures. It's the mix of these two types of strokes that make a figure balanced and therefore appealing. This is true both in gesture drawing and character design, but we'll see about this later on. As an assignment for this video, I would like you to take up the worksheet from the previous lesson and analyze in each figure which leg bears the weight of the pose and where are the directional forces and rhythmic energies at play. When you have done so, on top of the photo references, please try and draw the pose following the same method and time yourself. Try and keep this process under 1 minute, using quick strokes and not worrying about detail at all. In the next video, we're going to dress up the stick figures with some anatomy and design. See you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back. In this video, I'm gonna quickly recap the whole process of gesture drawing up to this point and show you how to complete your drawing by adding shapes to it. The first thing you want to do when looking at a live drawing model or reference picture is to put down the line of action, usually in a loose S or C shape. After that, you're going to mark on this line the directional axis. First, the most important ones of the shoulders and hips, and then any other ones that seem relevant to you, for example, the knees or elbows or ankles, etc. After this, you can add some very light markers to point out the general proportions and outline of the body, but be very careful not to draw any shapes. Keep it light. At this point, you can drop the plumb line to check whether the pose seems balanced. In this case, I noticed that mine isn't, at least looking at where I've traced the feet so far. They seem to stand too much to the right of the plumb line, so you can quickly adjust the oversight, if you have made one, for the figure to be more balanced. Now, add the directional forces that are aggressively pushing the movement, and then add the rhythmic energies that are keeping it all together. Around 30 seconds would have elapsed at this point, and you haven't drawn a single shape yet. It's important that you don't, as drawing shapes accurately is impossible at this stage if you haven't figured out the gesture first, and it's just gonna slow you down and mess up the balance of the pose. After you have figured out the gesture, you can start adding the shapes. Turn down the opacity on the gesture layers, and let's add a layer for the very basic shapes of the head, torso, and pelvis. Samantha Youssef recommends using a sort of egg shape for the torso and a rounded rectangle for the pelvis, as they are softer and more realistic versions of the circle and rectangle. Remember to draw shapes that have form. Think of how they look in 3D when you draw them. When you're done with the basic shapes, draw upon your blocking expertise to identify the shapes of the limbs and various parts of the body. Don't go into detail, stick to the outlines, but try to keep your hand loose and don't draw them too geometric. This is probably all you can do for 1 minute and 2 minute poses. But if you have a 5-minute pose, you can move on and use your knowledge of anatomy or your chosen stylization to finish the sketch and add some actual features. You can go ahead with a more realistic style trying to catch the likeness of the model, or you can go for a cartoony or stylized drawing. You can also simply add some shading to the blocking and be done with it. If you look at life drawing sketches of famous artists, most of them are half-rendered and still very sketchy. That's the beauty of this style, so don't worry about over-detailing. If you want to use this pose in an illustration, you can pick it up later and modify it to suit your needs. But for now, just enjoy the feeling of keeping it loose and nice. Here I'm rendering this in a more realistic style without shading. This probably wouldn't be my go-to style during this exercise, but I'm happy to come out of my comfort zone once in a while. That is actually something that you should do too when you have a defined style. Try something new from time to time. To the side of the realistic render, I'm gonna try a more stylized render, where I'm gonna exaggerate the hips a lot, making the head a little larger, the torso a little shorter, and the feet way smaller. Of course, this is gonna change the proportions of the line of action and the directional forces I kept underneath. I should have started back again with this to properly draw in a stylized manner. So this stylization is slightly half-baked, but this was mostly to show you how many different ways you can take this sketch if you like. For this video's assignment, I'd like you to go on the Croquis Cafe channel on Vimeo and choose one model video at random. They all have the same structure. There are a few 1-minute poses where you'll be able to put down the basic information like line of action, directional axis, weight, and directional forces, plus some very basic shapes if you're super fast. Then there will be some 2-minute poses that should allow you to put down the basics and give the mannequin some body. And finally, one 5-minute pose that will allow you to somewhat render the drawing with your chosen style, be it more realistic or more stylized. Feel free to follow as many of these videos as you wish, and I actually hope that you'll take up the habit of watching a video a day and practice figure drawing daily. This brings the figure drawing section to a close. In the next video, I'll move on to the topics of design and appeal, the basic concepts of character design. I'll see you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome back. So far, we have approached topics that dealt with the realistic representation of life, observing and reproducing reality in a visual form to the best of our ability. This section about character design will move into the uncharted territory of adding imagination and creativity to the act of drawing. Of course, drawing characters for comics, animation, and video games is still about observing reality, but with the invaluable addition of our own unique view and perspective. I truly believe that any creative process happens when there is a mix of elements. It's as much a mix of imitation and innovation as it is of reality and imagination. Made-up characters and made-up words are at their most engaging when they are believable, so you need that hook on reality, that understanding of anatomy and perspective to be able to ground your imagination and create something that viewers can identify with, but at the same time that helps them escape from reality and transport them onto another dimension. This video is called Sweet Lies because creating great characters for great stories is like telling a lie. It is taking something that is mundane and amplifying it, exaggerating it to the point that it becomes interesting, majestic. I heard this term to refer to exaggeration from one of my favorite artists, T.B. Choi, and I think it is absolutely correct as a description of creating art in general. This idea of creating believable worlds is one of Disney's core ideas, and I believe it's one of the reasons why, at least in the Western tradition, there isn't another studio that can draw animations quite as good as they do. In their seminal book The Illusion of Life, Disney animators Thomas and Johnston list the main qualities that make a character appealing. Of course, this is a historical title and it's still up to subjective taste, but I think that their reasoning is still valid today. A character is appealing when it has, and I quote, a quality of charm, pleasing design, simplicity, communication, and magnetism. So, what does it mean? Because it doesn't mean that characters have to be cutesy or even that they have to look like a Disney product. There are extremely appealing characters that have been created by other studios and that do not necessarily align with the classic Disney aesthetic. And also there are characters in the Disney movies that do not look like Disney characters at all and are still very appealing. I'm gonna pull up some examples of characters I think are incredibly appealing. They may not be what you like, but I hope you can still see my reasoning behind the term. So off the top of my head, I'd include Robin Hood from the classic Disney movie, Rapunzel, Simba both as a kid and as an adult, Chell from Road to El Dorado, to move away from Disney, Meb McTire from one of my favorite studios, Cartoon Saloon, Full Metal Alchemist also to change genre, and Atlantis as an example of a Disney movie that doesn't look very Disney at all, but it's still amazing. If you see them all on the same page, these characters don't look anything like each other. They are different in styles and have been created decades apart in different continents. However, they all have in common that appeal Thomas and Johnston were talking about. I think that they really hit the spot when they say that while the live actor has charisma, the animated drawing has appeal. So, let's try and narrow it down. Appeal is a combination of various factors. It definitely starts with a clean shape. Messy silhouettes and unclear designs don't make us want to look at them. If the eye of the viewer isn't led to specific things to look at, it will wander off and be lost. So as you can see, all these characters have great clear shapes, whether it's the super curvy Chell, or the all-round Meb, or the clean corners and squares of Milo's design. They can all be broken down to basic shapes pretty easily, which is what makes them clear to understand at a first glance. But the beauty of the design is also that it brings together elements that are simple, like basic shapes, and elements that are complex, to make the character unique and memorable. So while Rapunzel may just be another Disney princess, she has her hair that is a character on its own. And Simba isn't just another lion. He is in fact very different from Mufasa, even though they resemble each other, because he has a mid-parting in his hair, which is pretty specific for a big cat. All these details in outfit, hairstyle, facial traits are what makes the character unique, and you need that uniqueness to make them memorable. When Thomas and Johnston talk about pleasing design, I think they refer to an inner rhythm in the character's features. So the design doesn't have to be all round or in a specific style, but rather its parts have to make sense with one another and have to have an harmony unto themselves. As I was mentioning, Milo from Atlantis isn't your regular Disney character. He doesn't have anything in common with the classic rounded designs from Disney's golden period. He is all sharp corners and squared fingertips. However, he has an inner rhythm that is pleasing to the eye. Similarly, while manga style may not be your cup of tea, there is something inherently pleasing about the design of the brothers Edward and Alphonse together. The two main characters from Full Metal Alchemist complement each other, with Edward being so small and Alphonse so large. Remember, balance and juxtaposition of opposing elements is what makes a drawing harmonious. Finally, they talk about magnetism, the famous charisma, and that's something that certainly is communicated mostly by the acting in the animation, but I think they can also be conveyed in the character studies and poses. Each one of these characters is incredibly magnetic in their own way, according to their own backstory, qualities, and flaws. Chell is sardonic and alluring, Edward is stubborn and angry, Alphonse temperate but resolute. Rapunzel is incredibly flighty, joyous one moment and distraught the next. All of them have very clear personalities, complex personalities, with pros and cons that make even characters that are animals or anthropomorphic animals incredibly appealing and realistic. So I think that it comes down to 4 main points with regards to what makes a character engaging, regardless of its style. 1. Clean, communicative shapes. 2. Unique and memorable details that hint at the character's personality and background. 3. Harmonious rhythm within the chosen style. 4. Charisma, magnetism, a complex personality that comes through their clothes, poses, and expressions. We are going to talk about clothing, acting, and expressions in the next videos, but let's stop and talk about shapes first. When developing character design options, it's very common to work with silhouettes rather than with lines to start with. Some people prefer to work with shapes in general, while others prefer to sketch with lines. It doesn't really matter which category you fall into, because you have to become proficient at both. But seriously, there are many advantages with working with shapes at the beginning of the creative process. First, you can put down many of them quickly, iterating constantly by changing small details to the silhouette without worrying about details. Second, since you don't have inner details to distract you, you can quickly compare and see which shape is the clearest, most appealing option. Furthermore, you can get back to the basics of geometric shapes and tap into the archetypal stereotypes of design. Of course, you don't want to be cliched, but it's good to use some of these archetypes to quickly communicate to the viewer certain aspects of your character's personality. All characters can be ascribed to 3 basic shapes: circle, square, and triangle. The circle is the feminine shape by default. Its roundness is reminiscent of maternity, softness. It makes us feel secure and lullabied, as if we were inside a cocoon. The square is a dependable shape. You can't tip it over as much as you try. It is traditionally associated with male characters. It's perhaps not the most interesting shape in the world, but it will not fail you in a pinch. The triangle is tricky. It can capsize easily, it's a bit shifty, and you can't really trust it, so you guessed it. That's the shape traditionally given to villains. Now, of course, you can have a lead male character with a pointy chin instead of a square one. But didn't you think that there was something shifty about Hans from Frozen? I mean, from the beginning. And look, his design is literally made of subtle triangles. Kristoff, on the other hand, is made up of rectangles and circles, because he's a big, cuddly guy you can depend on. So when you start creating shapes for your character, think about their personality, their backstory, and especially the traits that you want the viewers to immediately catch on. You can start by settling on your archetypal shape, and then build on that, adding detail while keeping an eye on the readability of the silhouette. It is not unusual to create 30 or 40 silhouettes for a first round of character design, especially if you're working with a client. Usually, you will then settle on a few of those options and then create more and refine those until after many rounds of pivoting back and forth, you'll reach your preferred silhouette. To create more of these options quickly, you can simply modify the ratio of the proportions of the character, just experimenting and seeing where this experimentation will take you. The important thing is that you're always mindful of keeping your proportions interesting. Regular features are boring. Remember when I talked about competing lengths? If everything is equally spaced, the human eye doesn't know where to go and keeps wandering. As an assignment for this video, I would like you guys to research and find characters that you think are appealing and analyze them to find out if they respect the rules of appeal as outlined before. You can do this by voice or by compiling them on a page and writing down your notes. It's up to you. In the next video, I'm gonna demo for you a fun exercise you can try to kickstart your imagination. Get out of your comfort zone and push those shapes by ignoring everything you know and everything you think you like. So I'll see you there when you're ready. Hi guys, and welcome to this practice video where I'm gonna share with you a fun exercise designed to take you out of your comfort zone and free your imagination. First, you need to select the lasso tool in Photoshop to create some random shapes you're gonna use for this exercise. If you want, you can use the ones I've made. I've saved them as exercise 10 random shapes. If you are making them though, don't think too much about them as you create them. Honestly, just draw some random scribbles. The point is to try and push yourself to see design in the most weird and difficult scenario, so there's no right or wrong. I usually prepare around 6 shapes in 2 rows so that you can use 3 for faces and 3 for full body figures. When you've done this, you can either just go ahead and try to draw the characters, or you can find yourself a theme and stick to it. I find that some boundaries are actually useful for the creative process in order to give us a frame of mind within which to work. So you can either Google something and find yourself a theme, or you can pick at random. One way to do the latter is to go on the Character Design References Pinterest profile and look at their boards. Character Design References is a great resource for artists in general, as it has lots of boards to observe how to draw tricky body parts and turnarounds. In addition, they have a wide library of categories of characters, like pinups, martial artists, old people, pirates, you get the gist. So a fun way to pick a character category at random is simply to scroll really fast and then click without looking. So I ended up on the warrior category. Warrior it is. Bear in mind that you don't have to take this theme too seriously. At the end of the day, it's just a fun warm-up to break away from your own preconceptions about style and design. So if you feel too stressed by the categorization, just drop it and draw whatever you like. So the goal of this exercise is to observe the shape and just try and build a character within them. The character doesn't have to fit perfectly within the shape, but it should loosely fill it. You can draw just a head or go for a full figure. It's up to you. You don't have to stick with the shape's order either. Just jump around to whichever inspires you first. I'm gonna start with the first one, purely because I was immediately drawn to the pointy top of the shape that reminded me of a helmet. And since this is a warrior theme, I figure it fits. Please try not to plan too much when you're doing this. Let yourself be led by the creative process rather than controlling it. Much of drawing is about observation, planning, measuring, control, so it's nice to let loose from time to time and just let your hand move. Most of your drawings in this condition will probably be bad, but it doesn't matter. The point is to experiment with proportions and styles that you would never otherwise consider, not to get a million likes on Instagram. So in this first shape, I ended up drawing an anthropomorphic bull or calf, who is also a warrior with some sci-fi elements in the helmet. Cool. Moving on to another head, I'm gonna use this rectangular shape to scramble up proportions and draw a gigantic nose. So as I mentioned before, regular proportions are boring. That's why so much character design for animations is based on characters having weird ratios, like massive noses or heads or eyes. So try and scramble some proportions. Look for the weird in this exercise. I'm apparently drawing some sort of mustache guy who gives me strong Chamberlain vibes. I feel like he would have one of those little tiny swords that they use in fencing. So not really your typical broadsword warrior guy, but don't get too hung up on the theme. Moving on to this triangular shape that reminds me of a big boulder, I can sort of see an axe at the bottom left corner, so I'm gonna start from there. I feel like with this one I'm moving towards a more flat sort of graphic style than before, and that's okay too. You can quickly experiment with different styles with this exercise. I have gone more towards the typical Nordic warrior, axe, shield and horn helmet in this case. Sometimes you can also keep some elements outside of the shape, as I've done with this angry cloaked lady in the bottom corner, or as I'm doing with this flying, jumping warrior up here. As you can see, I'm not 100% sticking to the boundaries of the shape, but I'm still following the spirit of the shape, so to speak. Finally, for the last shape, I started with drawing an archer shooting a bow with their hair flowing behind them, and I ended up with an elf swinging a massive sword with their hair flowing behind them. I'm not feeling too strongly about the way I drew the hands on the sword, but I didn't have a reference, so I wasn't really expecting them to be perfect. That's also the point of this exercise. Looking at references when drawing illustration for school or work or fun is good, really good. Like, I would never recommend you not to have references, because they are the foundation of designing believable poses and outfits. However, sometimes we get too stuck on references and we get influenced by what we see and what we already know. So once in a while, it's great to just drop the reference and the anatomy and draw without worrying too much. I feel like this is becoming the theme of this course, but really the goal is to find the balance between depending on references and drawing upon your imagination. So yeah, please take your time and do this exercise too before moving on to the next video. I think it will be a lot of fun. Hi guys, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about a super important part of character design and an important aspect of drawing people in general: outfits. Clothes are a big part of what makes a character stand out, what makes them unique. They not only identify a character's culture, background, and time period, but they say a lot about their personality. As an example, I've pulled up 2 character designs I've created for a book series I'm illustrating called The Adept Universe by Megan Sienna Dodge. These 2 characters are called Gabby and Peggy, and they're twins. I wanted to use them as reference because they literally look the same physically, but you could never mistake them from one another because of their clothing. Of course, they also have widely different attitudes, which is something we'll touch upon in the next videos, but at first glance the pretty big difference is in their outfits. Gabby and Peggy are both magical girls. Peggy is a telepath. She can hear people's thoughts. Even though this is painful at times, she has a kind and cheerful disposition. She prefers to wear light garments and bright colors. Gabby is an amplifier, which in this magical universe means that she can amplify the talents of people around her. She is very protective of her twin sister and can come across as a bit rude or antagonistic at first. She has a bit of a girl style going on and prefers dark jeans. So, of course, very different personalities, hence different clothes. But the trick to making these characters believable is not to give them just any clothes, but to develop a cohesive set of outfits that fits the character in all their choices. Megan, the author of the book, gave me notes on the fact that Peggy, for example, prefers skirts. That's great, but what kind of skirts? There are literally millions of skirts in the universe, so you have to choose which skirts would actually fit the character. I think she'd be into this checkered skirt, especially paired with the cute blue top, light and soft. I don't think she'd wear this white one that seems a bit too short and too tight. She'd totally wear this pleated one, both in terms of shape and color palette, while she wouldn't wear this one even though it's checkered because of the red that is too intense. As much as she'd like skirts, I don't think she'd wear one this long. She's a bit of a Betty from Riverdale, but this length would make too much of a statement and would be impractical. I think she'd wear something midi, especially in this muted pink, while she definitely wouldn't wear this one because it's, well, all wrong. Too much of a statement in terms of asymmetrical cut, too loud in terms of color, and too provocative. So remember, when you're creating your character, try not to give them just a t-shirt, just some pants, just a jacket. Try and go into detail, into fashion, because fashion has to do with everybody, even people who don't care about it, as The Devil Wears Prada taught us. So, how can you get those details that make your character's outfit more authentic? Well, the answer is research. Research and the collection of references is a big part of character design. Here's an original character of mine that I'm writing a story about. Her name is Kibibi, and she's a contemporary teenager. Here I was working on a few cohesive outfits for a wardrobe to try and define her personality better. Of course, having been born in the 90s, my mental image of a teenager refers to something from the early to mid-2000s featuring ties and cargo pants when you were trying to be edgy, and a clean cut shirt and jeans to be respectable. This, of course, is totally wrong for contemporary teenagers. As I mentioned before, observation is a big thing in life drawing, and actually also in character design. If we stop observing, we let our imagination do the work to fill in the gaps, and while this may be good in some aspects of the creative process, if you don't do your research, you may fill in the gaps of an outfit with your own preconceptions. So it's vital that you do your research, be it for a different cultural background or just characters belonging to a different age group that you are. So for Kibibi, I googled influencers that are famous among teenagers at the moment and looked up some teen and fashion magazines. Of course, you don't want to copy things straight from the fashion adverts, but at least you'll get a general sense for the vibe you want to convey. Since I created this character, I know that Kibibi has some issues with her family, which means that she's at a point in her life where she relies on her friends' opinion more than her parents or her sisters. This in turn means that her outfits are actually super important to her because they represent her identity among her peers and show her link to her friends. She's not so confident regarding her looks, but she doesn't want to show it. So sometimes she'll wear stuff that makes her slightly uncomfortable, like crop tops, just to show that she's fine with it. She likes music and she's recently gone through a grunge period, so she's big on the pins, jeans jacket and Eskimos. She also likes Dr. Martens boots because they're tough and they make her feel tougher. She doesn't come from an incredibly wealthy family, so I recycled the same 3 pairs of shoes for these 5 poses. Kibibi is also into sports and quite likes the whole sportswear vibe as it brings together items that are feminine or revealing while at the same time retaining an element of tomboyishness that allows her to downplay her outfit. Having already figured out some of the wardrobe choices for Kibibi, I'm gonna research some new outfits and show you guys my process. So of course, it all starts on Pinterest, which is a goldmine for references. I just googled sportswear fashion girl to create a new sportswear outfit for Kibibi. I don't want something that is too sporty because she's not wearing this to do a workout. She's actually wearing it to go to school or out with her friends. So it needs to have some elements of sportiness while keeping the same vibe of the rest of her wardrobe. So I select one item that really catches my eye. In this case is this rain jacket or anorak kind of thing, which I think looks super interesting and specific. As I said, you want to avoid stuff that is generic, unless your character is known to be incredibly boring and bland. I continue looking until I find something that screams Kibibi, which in this case is this red anorak hoodie thingy. It's got it all. It's comfy and chilled like Kibibi likes the rest of her jackets, but at the same time it's got this asymmetrical cut with the bare shoulder that looks weird enough to be something she would use to make a statement or rile up her mother. Now I just have to find something that goes with it. I start by googling the anorak outfit and sometimes Google Images delivers, but more often than not I'll find myself on Pinterest again. I ended up on this outfit with the comfy trousers and sneakers because I know that Kibibi already has similar pants and shoes, and the large on large aesthetic will remind her of Billie Eilish, whom she listens to constantly. So now that I have my references, I'm gonna show you guys how to draw clothes in the next video. As an assignment, try and look up some references for a character you're working on, or simply try and look up an outfit you'd like to wear if you don't have an original character. I'll see you guys in the next video when you're ready. Hey guys, and welcome back. In this video, I'm gonna show you my step-by-step when drawing an outfit for one of my characters, plus some general tips and tricks to consider when drawing clothes. The first thing to remember in this process is that clothes are worn on top of the body. They are not molded into it like a second skin. This may seem obvious, but it's the #1 issue I see in beginners' work. You have to consider that garments are made of different materials and different weight, which will affect how they are folding over the body in what is called draping. Garments, especially t-shirts, shirts, hoodies, and tops in general, have one point of contact where they actually touch the body, and then they drape down from there, just like a tablecloth does on top of a table. The way they fold down and the folds they display depend on the body shapes that are underneath, as well as the type of material. If you're pursuing some sort of stylization, it's best to simplify the type and quality of the folds to improve the design, rather than trying to replicate all of the folds you see in the reference photos. Otherwise, your outfit may end up looking rather creased than natural. Let's have a quick look at how different types of sleeves fold over an arm. Let's take a large cotton t-shirt, for example. There are 2 points of contact in this case, because of the anatomy of the outstretched arm. One is where the deltoid muscle meets the bicep and triceps, and one is at the edge of the sleeve. So according to how big the muscles are, we'll see some creases at the deltoid point of contact, and some at the end of the sleeve, aiming diagonally towards the torso. With a long sleeve shirt, the point of contact are at the deltoid, the elbow and the wrist, each area where there is a relief from the arm. Since a shirt is lighter than a t-shirt and has less fabric weighing it down, the creases will be smaller. A hoodie is similar to a shirt in terms of shape, but much heavier, so the creases will be more pronounced and deeper. You will also have to draw the outline of the hoodie farther out from the outline of the body, as the material is thicker. As a side note that I discovered taking a masterclass with TP Choi, period clothing is usually more rigid and structured than modern clothing, which is made for comfort, so you might want to reflect that in the way that you portray the creases and draping. So as I said, first you need to know what are the body shapes underneath the clothes, so I'm gonna quickly redraw Kibibi's body. Then let's start with the hoodie. Since my style is much more simplified than the reference picture, the hoodie won't fit exactly the same way. Kibibi has a very small torso and very large hips and legs, so I want the hoodie to be a little more snug than in the reference picture, or it would look like a sack of potatoes. I still wanted to give the same casual, chilled vibe it gives in real life, so that's what I'm gonna try and maintain in my rendition. Remember to identify the point of contact where the sleeve is actually touching the arm, and then work your folding from there. Here I'm gonna redraw part of the hoodie because it was too snug and didn't fit around the sides. This way I've left a little crease just on top of the hip to convey that this sweater is actually pretty big and has enough fabric to fold over itself. This will enhance the comfy, chilled vibe of the garment. I recommend to draw each piece of clothing on a different layer, so that you can easily go in and make adjustments without spoiling other elements if you need. The pants are very similar to the ones I've already drawn on the left, however they are a different material. The ones on the left are jeans, so they are actually quite sturdy and don't present many folds. These pants instead are cotton or some other lighter material, so they are going to crease more and give you a sort of puffy balloon effect. A little trick to make pants look more formal is to draw parts of the front line where they are usually folded to store in a closet. This will immediately separate them from jeans and make them look smarter. I know that shoes are a pain for most artists to draw. They used to be a pain for me at least, until I realized that shoes are very structured, so you can actually make use of simple shapes to build them. A tennis shoe seen from the front is basically a triangle with a round base. So if you keep that in mind and draw a faint outline, then you can simply fill it in with all the realistic details you want, like the rubber sole, the lateral flaps, the laces, etc. I find that the more you give detail to shoes and clothes in general, the better they turn out. In this particular stylization, it's almost as if the contrast between the simple shapes of the design and the added-on realistic details like stitching and patterns really makes the outfit pop out. So when you're done with the details, you can add even more stuff to complement the look of your character and make their personality shine. With Kibibi, I could add a ton of accessories like headphones, a backpack, a purse, some jewelry. Just remember to be specific even with these items. Like with the headphones, there's a world of options to choose from. Chunky headphones, branded headphones, cheap ones, headphones with kitten ears, AirPods, you name it. Just make sure that whichever you choose makes sense with the character's personality and likes. One last note about folds. Just like the muscles in the arms, folds look better when they are asymmetrical. Don't just draw 3 big bumps on both sides. It doesn't let the design flow. Try and follow the movement of the fold as it moves inwards, and keep the creases points at a diagonal tilt from each other, implying a rhythm, just like when we drew it in the directional axis on a pose. The assignment for this video is made up of 2 parts. First, I would like you guys to use the worksheet provided and study how the clothes from different time periods fit the wearer, and by employing your gesture drawing skills, replicate them in your sketches and drawings. You can choose a realistic style or go for your own personal stylization. It's up to you. When you're done with the sketches, create a basic pose for your original character and integrate in the design the outfit you researched as part of the assignments from the previous video. Go as detailed as you can, choosing accessories, props, and hairstyles if you wish. Hi guys, and welcome to the last video in the character design section, where we talk about drawing expressions, acting, and composition. I know the last part of this series was pretty cursory. However, I just wanted to give you some pointers about character design within the context of the fundamentals of drawing. There are many awesome resources for character design on 21Draw that can help you further develop your skills as a character designer and visual development artist, so I hope you'll use them to go more in depth after you finish this introduction. So in the anatomy and gesture drawing sections, we have talked about how to draw heads and faces from a technical point of view. When you draw expressions in an illustration or for a character design model sheet, you aren't just concerned about that, but mostly about really conveying the meaning behind the action, the feeling your character is experiencing. By the way, a model sheet is basically a guide for all animators working on a project to know how a character works. You have turnaround model sheets where you show the character from every angle, and then you have expression and pose model sheets where you show every conceivable expression that specific character would make to make sure everybody is on the same page with regards to the character's personality. In the first video about character design, we talked about shapes and how important creating clean designs and clear silhouettes is for the character's appeal. The other ingredient in character's appeal is his charisma, right? That charisma, that charm, comes through in these pose and face expressions. This is called acting. So while shapes are based on good design, good acting is always rooted in good story. Good story means having created a complex background for your character and making sure that it reflects in their poses, expressions, and gestures. When you explore your character's expression, it's important that you don't limit it to the position of the mouth, eyes, or eyebrows. Acting is so much more than an upturned or downturned mouth. When a human being is happy or excited, their whole body shows, and their face will transform to accommodate the expression. As you can see in this expression cheat sheet featuring Anne Hathaway, her face changes radically when she's smiling or pouting. When you're smiling a big, authentic smile, your face will squash, becoming larger to the sides and shorter. When you're serious or raising your eyebrows in skepticism or challenge, your face will become longer and narrower. This is what is called a stretch. Squash and stretch are basic principles of animation, but also valid when it comes to drawing believable emotion. Having a solid grasp of your character's face shape is particularly important when you're applying this squash and stretch to exaggerate the expression and really convey it to the viewer. If you don't know exactly which basic shapes make up your character, you'll end up losing their uniqueness in the different expressions. If you look at this expression sheet featuring Eugene from Tangled, you can see that his face is made up of triangles and squares. Even the back of his skull is simplified with a straight line thanks to his hairstyle. His face planes are very clear in the mind of the character. Even when his face is taken to the extreme, you can see that his cheek and jaw lines lengthen. The eyebrow line that was squarely coming in towards the eye socket straightens a little, and his brow creases and shortens to make space for the eyes to grow bigger. The person depicted is still Eugene, because all of the lines that make up his face in normal mode have simply shifted to accommodate the new expression. They haven't changed, they haven't morphed. A great way to learn how to simplify human emotions into these expression sheets is to look up the Disney classics, especially movies like Robin Hood, The Sword in the Stone, and 101 Dalmatians. They are absolutely stunning in terms of acting, and you can actually see the pencil strokes, which is great because you realize that they are amazing without relying on special effects and the help of digital art softwares. To build an expression sheet and practice squash and stretch, there's a practical exercise you can do and that helped me tons when I was studying traditional animation. You create a quick basic face shape for your character in the pose you prefer. Usually 3/4 is a good one for this exercise. Keep this shape on a separate layer so you can always go back to it if you wish. Then, on a new layer, start drawing a medium expression for your character. Not happy, not sad, just normal. Don't worry about details too much. A lot of the process of character design is fast and sketchy. When you're done with the first expression, merge the two layers, duplicate, and move it to the side. Lower the opacity and create a new layer on top. On this new layer, draw a new expression based on the old one, really checking that the overall volumes of the face stay the same. So if you're drawing a smiling expression like this one, the sides of the face will squash and the length of the head will shorten, but the volume remains the same. You can never both stretch the face horizontally and vertically, because it would mean that the face is actually getting bigger. When you're done with this pose, delete the one underneath, duplicate, nudge sideways, and move on to a new one. This method will allow you to progressively explore several different expressions for your characters without ever losing track of the volumes and shapes of the original design. Another great way to practice these expressions and practice acting is to look at live action movies and learn from great actors. The problem with many expression sheets made by beginners is that they tend to represent just one emotion: angry, happy, sad, which is fair enough to start with, but a human actor will never portray just one emotion. The human emotional range is more complex than that, so to add a layer of credibility to your characters and really convey good acting, you should study from awesome movies and try and convey the complexity of the character's inner thoughts. Incredibly famous shot of Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, can you define Claire's expression? It isn't happy, although he's definitely amused. He conveys confidence to the point of smugness, anticipation, pensiveness. Similarly, in this scene from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Leonardo DiCaprio, who by the way is absolutely amazing in that movie, is experiencing a bit of a rough patch. He's very emotional, prone to bursting into tears and melting down. Here specifically, you can see he's deeply moved by something. He's trying to keep it in, his face is all scrunched up in the effort, but the tears are welling up, and he's about to burst. Same here in this scene from Carol. Cate Blanchett manages to emote so much in this movie, while she's literally trying to keep her expressions as still as possible, as she's afraid people will find out about her love for Therese. In this screen grab, she's dancing, and while externally complying to her role in society, we can see from her body language that she does not want to be doing what she's doing. Her head is pulling back, facing away from her partner. Her eyes are moving even farther away, staring in the distance, like thinking of something else. A great challenge and practice is to look up these great movies and study how these actors build up believability in their performance. If you're trying to create a body of expressions and poses for your characters, try and depict them doing normal, random things. Beginners' expression sheets are filled with dramatic poses, and that's good, I mean, you need those too. But maybe try and add some more mundane ones as well. Let's see how your character eats, drinks, walks, sleeps. These everyday gestures will allow you to really explore the personality of your character, as you're taking away the wow factor given by the action pose. So all you're left with is their personality, their own take on the action. Going back to the Carol screen grab I showed you earlier, that's a pretty good scene to introduce the concept of composition. As I mentioned at the start of this course when talking about the golden ratio, composition is the art of placing characters and objects within the shot so that the viewer's eye is immediately drawn to the most important elements. It is a way that we can lead the viewers to take in the fundamental aspect of the story and then absorb the rest. When there's two or more characters in a scene, composition is also great to clarify the relation between the characters and subconsciously telling the viewer what these characters are really thinking, despite what they might be saying. This scene is almost evenly divided into 3 vertical sections. On the far left, we have the man's back, very square, very solid, in dark colors and oppressively leaning in towards Carol. In the middle, we have Carol, pulling away from the man with her hair enhancing this motion with curved lines that clash with the shape language of the man. The right section is empty, leaving Carol's gaze to remain unfocused in the distance and immediately conveying a sense of otherness. She is looking for something else, a new relationship, an escape. A great way to improve your understanding of composition is to take screen grabs of carefully shot movies with good photography. If you're unsure what these movies are, just Google best photography movies or best acting movies, stuff like that, and try to recreate these scenes in your drawings. I recently did this screen grab study from the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, which is a great resource as the whole movie is beautifully shot. Everything is very well thought out and arranged, and the color palette is glorious. I wanted to challenge myself with a scene with a lot of characters and a very toned-down palette. This is the moment where Mr. Bennet and her daughters receive news that Lydia's dowry has been paid by her uncle and that the scandal of her eloping with Wickham has been averted. The eyes and body language of all the characters, even the carriage robber, are subtly pointing towards the letter in Mr. Bennet's hands. So the viewer's eye would normally first focus on that and then move around to the rest of the picture to take in the various expressions and sort away the characters' various reactions and personalities. As an assignment for this video, I would like you guys to create a folder with as many great movie scenes as you can, and little by little study and copy this acting and composition. Think of this as an ongoing assignment. I know recreating a whole scene can take time, so you don't have to complete one every day. It would be great if you could maybe finish one per week or even one per month. You can also use quick shapes or brush strokes to set down the composition. It doesn't have to be a detailed painting. Believe me, starting to think like a cinematographer will help you loads with staging and the overall effectiveness of your illustration. Hi guys, and welcome back for one last time. I really hope you enjoyed this course and that it gave you a sometimes brief but solid foundation to the fundamentals of drawing. As I said many times, all the topics in these videos are huge and could have entire courses specifically made on them. So I hope this series helped you understand what topics you are especially interested in, which ones are your strong suit, and which ones need more work, so you can now go more in depth as you choose. There are a few points that came up over and over during the course that I would like to sum up here. First, and it may seem obvious, but sometimes I feel like it isn't, to improve, you must practice. There is no magic pill, no easy tips and tricks, no wonder method. If you don't practice every day, you will never improve. Of course, not everybody can practice multiple hours per day, and that's fine, especially if drawing is a hobby for you. Just know that the amount of improvement is directly linked to the amount of practice, and make your decisions based on that fact. Second, It's vital that you know how anatomy and perspective work in a realistic way so that you can develop your own style. Stylization is always based on reality, and if you don't have a solid foundation for your stylized shapes, they will always look weak and not believable. Third, drawing is about seeing. Without the curious observation of the world around us and the recollection through sketches, you'll never be able to figure out the little details that will make your work stand out. You have to bring your own artistic vision and your own perception to your art and even your sketches to make them unique. Drawing is also about balance. We have seen that balance between directional forces and rhythmic energies make a simple gesture drawing sketch amazing. The balance between straight and curved lines within a character makes the design more appealing. The balance between the use of references for credibility and imagination makes your work relatable yet engaging. Finally, I cannot stress enough that drawing is about fun. If drawing becomes a chore, it will show in your final product. I love to draw, and I want to keep it a passion even if it is also my job, which isn't easy at times. Whenever I forget that I love drawing, that I chose this profession because it was my dream, my work begins to look stale. Even if sometimes it's hard and you get disheartened, always try and keep the intention, the motivation you had when you first started drawing clear in your mind, and you'll be fine. Right, so I have included a reading list in the companion for you guys to peruse. So please get those books, watch those movies, go more in depth. There's a world of knowledge out there just waiting for you. I recommend you keep a sketchbook at all times so you can keep up gesture drawing every day as a warm-up and keep track of your progress and your breakthroughs. Thanks again for supporting this project on Kickstarter, and thanks to 21 Draw for making this possible. You can find more resources at the 21 Draw website or on my website and social media. Please don't hesitate to get in touch via DM or email or tag me if you want to show me your coursework or just to say hi. I'd love to share your work on my social media channels. So bye for now and keep drawing!